Okay, Mr. Chair, we're live now.
Okay. Thank you. Apologize for starting just a little bit late. We had a few technical challenges there for a moment or two. Let me welcome you to today's session. First of all, let me thank our incredible staff who's been working diligently over the last several months to accommodate us on a number of work sessions. So we've had 2 or 3 this summer. We're scheduled for another round in October. That will be followed by, hopefully in the October timeframe, a draft that we will put out for the public to review. It is anticipated that we stay close to our timeframes that we've outlined in the past few months, that we'll be able to present a final plan, a comprehensive plan, by December the 2nd. But it requires all of us to continue the move forward in the manner that we've done thus far. Let me also thank our advisory committee members, as well as the general public, for those who've tuned in and to be part of this. Our objective here is to be as open, transparent, and have as much participation as possible. We really want your input. We cannot achieve our objectives without your input and participation. And certainly the staff of the superintendent and all of those who work with us as well. We have been very pleased with the amount of work that we've been able to accomplish, but that requires a great deal of coordination and partnership. We have a pretty full agenda for today. We're going to go directly into that, and I'm going to ask Rachel to start with an update for our export review team process plan. So Rachel, why don't you start with that, and we'll go right into it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before we do that, I just wanted to check if you wanted to acknowledge the board members who are present.
I was going to do that when you come back.
Oh, okay. Okay. As you know, the Maryland State Department of Education submitted their expert review team deployment plan and other supporting documents that were confidential to the AIB at the end of June for the AIB's review and approval. Since then, AIB staff and MSDE staff have been collaborating on some revisions to the deployment plan. And over the course of quite a few meetings, we've had some very good conversations and provided feedback. And earlier this week, MSDE submitted a revised school selection methodology. This is the methodology that will be used to select the schools that will be visited in this first year of expert review team visits. This fall and over the next winter and spring of 2023, a total of 50 schools will be visited, are proposed to be visited. And for the fall, there will be pilot visits. So the pilots that began last spring, that MSDE began, are going to continue this fall. And between 9 and 12 schools will be visited as part of the pilot phase. And then following the pilot phase, MSDE will be resubmitting other materials besides the school selection methodology, revised versions of them that will be used for the official visits that will begin in 2023. So this methodology that was submitted earlier this week, Superintendent Chaudhry is here with us today, and he'll be discussing the methodology in more detail that has been proposed. AIB staff is recommending that the AIB approve this methodology to be used to select the schools in this 22-23 school year. For the next school year, there are different requirements for how many schools need to be visited in the year and what combination of schools. So there will be a new methodology that MSD will propose for next school year and future school years. So this methodology is only for this first year. And so we're recommending approval of the methodology, and AIB staff and MSD staff are going to continue to collaborate and have discussions throughout the rest of this calendar year as the pilot phase begins and continues and completes. And in addition, AIB will be providing training on the blueprint and the rationale of the blueprint to the expert review teams this fall. And so, Mr. Chair, with that, if we wanted to have Superintendent Chaudhary.
Let's see, we have any discussion before we move to a motion for approval.
I think you would maybe want to have the superintendent discuss the methodology first, and then we could entertain a motion.
Is he on? Is he here yet?
I see him.
Before we do
Yes.
that, let's go back and do something I failed to do initially to introduce the board members who are here. I can't see them all on my screen. I see Fagan is in front of me, but could you note the others who are here?
Absolutely. We have, I'm just going to go in the order on my screen. We have Mr. Manco, Mr. Harris, Dr. Lynch, Dr. Doss, and Dr. Stapleton.
Okay.
The vice chair is on vacation this week.
Right. All right. All right. Well, what we will do now, unless there's some question about what Rachel has outlined, we'll go directly into the superintendent's presentation, and the superintendent is here. We'll go to him directly. First of all, Mr. Superintendent, let me thank you and your staff for working so well with our staff and working through some of the issues and concerns that we've talked about in the past few months. I'm delighted with the progress that we're making. As I've indicated to you personally, I think you're doing a wonderful job. We have a great staff relationship. We cannot get this done without a strong partnership, and I'm delighted with all that we've done thus far, and pass on to Clarence our appreciation for all that you and the staff are doing, and we thoroughly appreciate the cooperation and partnership. So with that, Mr. Superintendent, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chair Leggett. I will definitely pass it on to the State Board and Clarence and team, and we are going to get this right for our children. We don't get this moment back. It's a once in a generation opportunity, so we got to get it right. So I'm excited to be here today. I have one team member here from me for my research office who I'm going to pull in, Matt Duque. I see him here when we get to the slide, because they are the wonks and the statisticians and everything else when it comes to how to run this kind of stuff. And so I'm going to first go ahead and put on the presentation. I believe I can screen share. And there we go. I think we are there. All right. So we're going to do a couple of things today. It's really kind of two presentations in one. We're going to talk about the expert review team and where we are with that. And then as I promised that I would come back to you to give you a deep dive on our workforce and pipeline challenges and such. Oh, what happened? Oh, I think we all froze for a little bit or on my end. So can you hear me fine now? Okay, good. Everyone just froze for a second. And so, all right. So we are going to focus on expert review teams and then jump into workforce pipelines, both on the supply side and the demand side, as well as diversity. And so that will be where we're going to spend a longer moment of our time. And of course, I'll stop at sections for questions and such. So just to, we are always in front of the public. And so it's good to always remind people the 101 of things, right? The expert review team is a key component of the blueprint to drive school improvement, as well as a key aspect of what I would say of the governance and pillar around governance and accountability. And so in doing that in a very supportive manner, but also healthy pressure for improvement across our state. So MSD has been charged with putting together a team of experts to visit our schools across the state, beginning with a cross-section of schools across that have a wide variety of challenges. And so the methodology will reflect that. It's not just the lowest performing, it's also also other types of schools. So we can be able to apply those lessons learned. And ultimately, the team's job is to look at the school in a 360 manner, which involves everything from looking at data coming into the school from master scheduling, student achievement data, as well as staffing data and other things, and then coming into the school and doing a set of qualitative visits and focus groups in classrooms and PLCs, talking to parents, talking to teachers, talking to students, and then ultimately using all of that to understand the root causes for both things that are going well and root causes for things that are not going well, and make recommendations for improvement. And there is also teeth to that recommendation. I would be remiss if I did not call that out. The expert review team can say, hey, your curriculum is not getting it done, so therefore you must adopt X CCR curriculum when all of that is built out. So that's the goal, and ultimately to visit all of our schools. So here's just the project timeline and where we are. For me, I always like to pilot things and pressure test things, and our school systems have been amazing in being able to step up and be involved with the pilot. So we did a small scale pilot. Would have been a little bigger, but last year was not quite the normal that we had hoped for. And so we visited 3 schools that shaped, along with just research review and other things, our initial set of thinking and materials. We were able to meet our deadline for submission. That led to a lot of great feedback from your staff and us. And then ultimately what we made the case for is, can we extend out the pilot? And that we appreciate your willingness to do that as well. And so we'll extend out the pilot into the fall, further pressure test the materials, refine them, collaborate with AIB staff, and then as well as the methodology that we have brought to you for approval, and we'll spend more time talking about that today. And then ultimately we're going to resubmit everything in December for final approval that will involve everything from the deployment plan, the materials, the schools, everything else for the formal visits that come throughout the spring. So that's essentially where we are. And then so really quickly, the methodology at a high level. And Matt, if you can come on, because I don't want to get stumped with statistical questions, because there are some PhDs on here. And so basically, we have 3 buckets of methodology. One is just the largest learning loss coming out of COVID, who has experienced the largest learning loss. And Matt, I'm going to ask you to give a little more color commentary on these as soon as I stop talking. The other one is just the lowest performing school in the state. And we made some adjustments to that to make sure that we had geographic diversity in terms of where the lowest performing schools, and that's looking at proficiency. And then ultimately, we also wanted to look at schools with achievement gaps. This one is probably one of my favorite ones because, you may be a 4-star school, but your achievement gaps are wide. And so, and the blueprint is designed for all kids, especially our historically underserved kids. And so we want to be able to visit those schools and be able to make recommendations as well. So our schools are not just resting behind high averages, or as I say, not hiding behind the averages based on demographics. And so Matt, if you can just say a little more about each one, just a little more about some context around the methodology, and then we'll stop for questions.
Sure. So as the superintendent mentioned, the 3 methods, they're really creating 3 buckets. So the first method identifies 17 schools, the second method 17 schools, and then the third method 16 schools to arrive at a total of 50 schools. So there are really 3 different methods. They're not identifying different lists of schools, but we made sure they're uniquely identified. So in the learning loss is measuring the change in achievement from the 2019 to 2021 assessments, just using ELA math. We average those together, and we do a weighted average because in some high schools, right? The math assessment in high school is the algebra assessment. And in particularly higher performing schools, students take that before high school. So in 7th and particularly 8th grade. So there sometimes is a imbalance between the number of students taking ELA and math. So a straight average would throw that off. The lowest performing, we rely on the 2019 ELA in math, and again, a weighted average. So we're just pulling out the top 17 schools with the lowest performance on that metric. As the superintendent mentioned, we did do some adjustments for geographic diversity. So we made sure there were 3 local school systems represented in that group. And then the third criteria, the learning gaps, those are within schools. So we're comparing a group against all of their peers that are not in that group within the school. For example, we would look at the percent proficient for students with disabilities within a school and compare it against all of the students in that same school that are not students with disabilities. One caveat to all of this is we looked at all schools, but we did exclude schools with less than 10 students, both for statistical reliability and privacy concerns. Then also, since we're looking at individual tests, if there were less than 10 test takers in a school, we exclude them as well. I think that covers most of it. If there are any questions, be happy to answer.
We have one more slide on next steps, but any questions from the board?
I have a question on the third methodology. That's a little bit more difficult for me to explain and recognize, because what I see, does that include all of the things which you evaluate on what I see here in front of me?
Yeah, I should have mentioned, so upon the recommendation of AIB staff, the 16 schools we identified in method 3 are broken into 4 categories.
Okay.
So that we're taking, and the 4 categories are race, ethnicity, students with disabilities, English learners, and economically disadvantaged. So that each of those 4 categories, we're taking the 4 schools with the largest gap within that category.
And the gap meaning gap between the students in that school or students outside, students at other schools? What is it? What is it compared to?
The comparison is within a school. So it would be, for example, economically disadvantaged students within a school, and
Right.
the students that are not economically disadvantaged within that same school.
Okay. And you identified, let me first of all say, and I think we are all clear, if not, we have not and will not identify and discuss the individual schools or name of the schools at this point in time, because all of that, I assume, will be held confidential until a certain time within your process, correct?
That is correct. I want to get the methodology right and sound. And, you know, we really have the way we enter and engage our school, our superintendents and everything. It's a very thoughtful approach versus just a cold email. And so I don't want to, that's just, you know, I don't want them to read it in a headline. I want them to hear it from directly from my team through their superintendents and such. But the methodology first, we're waiting for approval. So.
Right. Was there anything else you wanted to say on the third bucket? I may have interrupted you a second. You presenter, yeah.
Matt, do you want to say anything a little bit about like what the widest gaps mean and what that looks like? Just a little more commentary on that.
Sure. So like I said, the 4 groups, we look at them separately. So essentially for race and ethnicity, we're comparing each racial and ethnic group within a school to their peers that are not in that group. So for example, all Black students, what is their performance compared to non-Black students, which would be all the other racial ethnic groups. And we're comparing within the school because you're going to visit the school. So all the students should have the same, theoretically, resources and access, opportunity. So sending the expert review team there to see why are there learning gaps between these groups.
Is this the third one? Is this methodology in terms of any empirical analysis of student performance? Is this one that we've just developed uniquely to us, or is it something that's fairly standard in the field of education? You know?
Yeah, people
Yes.
study achievement gaps all the time. It is my obsession.
No, I mean, I know that number 3 though. That
Methodology.
Yes, that methodology. There are state accountability systems, including my old stomping grounds, that have like a closing the gap domain. And so you don't essentially give a pass to schools that just serve affluence and then have concentrations of poverty, and those kids end up being left behind. And because, if you just measure proficiency. And the other day I was here, Chair Leggett, you had to share about a teacher who takes a student from a 30 to a 60 versus a teacher who takes an 80 student to a 5. There's argument to be made that other teacher who took a 30 to a 60 is a more highly effective teacher and is doing something amazing. This is that attempt to be able to capture those things, also to push on those things.
Gotcha. Thank you. Thank you. Any other question from board members?
Yes, Dr. Lynch and then Mr. Manco.
Hi, thank you so much for going over the methodology. I'm wondering, when you're developing your sample, after you've identified the list of eligible schools, are you using an approach to make sure that we have representation across the state of Maryland as well?
So that's something we looked at with internally as well as with the AIB staff. We tried other options where we made sure there was more geographic or even school level diversity, because on some of these you see more elementary or more high school be identified, but it didn't seem to make much of a difference. So particularly in method 1 and 3, we do see fair geographic diversity in terms of different regions of the state.
And if I could just add, I did take a look, and among the 3 different criteria, the 14 LEAs, or schools from 14 LEAs will be visited in this first year.
That's good to know. And I think my second question is, you may be talking about this in a few minutes, is that this methodology for just this school year, how will that shift moving forward? Because when we look at something like learning loss, is that a metric you will continue to use, or what will you be using as we move forward? And then how will the assessments that you're looking at, will it go from the year before assessments, or will you still see like a 2-year lag in assessment data that you'll be using to make those determinations?
So the learning loss, I think, is unique to the times of COVID, right? And then at a certain point, we start just looking at maybe method 2 and 3, but that's something we would come back to have conversations with you every year around. And so, but I wouldn't want to end up living in a world where we're constantly just changing up the methodology. So we want to hold that stable. But yes, it would always be prior year, but we try to get multi-year as much as possible, because that just it makes it much more stronger when you look at things like growth. But COVID has created a weird disruption, and then we're also standard setting our tests. I like to remind people, I just gave a epic presentation this past week to the state board, reminding them about how we're standard setting our tests. And so, to me personally, I see spring 23 assessment as the true baseline of our state, because last year was supposed to be normal, but quarantines and disruptions and the horrible January of Omicron. And so we'll still have these results come out, but these results are lagged because of the standard setting of the 6-month period, which we only have to do once. But to me, truly, when you look at this past spring and then next spring, we will know much more about where our kids are at and everything else. And to me, that's like the new baseline. And really our methodology should really be set from that point on. And so, so that we would come back to you in June of 23. Obviously, December, we're coming back to you for more lessons learned on the pilot. But in June of 23, after all the visits and the first set of, visits that we've done and reports and recommendations, we would say, hey, this methodology, what's the updates we should make and everything, and we would have that conversation. I think the learning loss one is a time-bound methodology that sunsets, and then you just stick to 2 and 3. Yeah.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
Yes, Mr. Manco?
Yeah, just curious if there was any conversation amongst the team at looking at having any of the methods really focused on strengths. Like, it seems like a lot of these are based on looking at the lowest performing, looking at losses. I know, sometimes in analysis, it's important to have kind of a contrasting element to a kind of counterpoint. So, potentially looking at schools that have the have the smallest gaps, or have the least decreases in learning loss as a comparison point.
So the first thing is we can't arrive at these schools if we don't have the list of schools that you just described. So we do have that, right? We would have that list and everything else. Now, if you want to add more work to my team to also visit out of scope of the blueprint of high performing schools at this time, I'm happy to have that discussion, but I'm going to request some timeline shifts as well. But I think the goal is when we visit these schools, the blueprint does call for start with the lower performing and then eventually high performing. All schools will be touched in the state, no doubt. But to find largest learning loss, we had to compare them to those with smaller learning loss. Same thing with lowest performing, rack and stack, etc. So we do have that, like that exists. It's just they're not up first for the visits. Now, if we wanted to, change up the 50 and divided by largest learning loss, least learning loss, lowest performing, highest performing, largest gap, we can have that conversation in December. It might be an intriguing one, but I would, if Rachel, if you have any other thoughts on that one.
Very similar to yours. The statute specifically did call for a focus on learning loss in the first beginning in the 22-23 school year, continued learning loss. So I think we kind of were focused on that for this first year, but and we'll talk about this more as the future methodology is developed. But I think beginning next year, there might be some room as starting July 1, 2023, each year the teams will visit 10% of the schools in the state, which is about 140 schools a year. So that provides a lot more opportunity to add in a different sampling of schools. And ultimately, as the superintendent said, every school will be visited. And the blueprint does specifically talk about visiting the highest performing schools as well and learning from them and replicating best practices if they assuming they have them.
Rachel, could I just add that most of the schools identified under methods 1 and 3 turn out to be higher performing schools.
That's an excellent
point, sort of
Matt.
balance off number 2.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Criteria 1 really did, what it really ended up, if you just take the largest learning loss in absolute terms, some of the best schools, not surprisingly, had the largest learning loss because they had a long way to drop. Whereas your lower performing schools, while they also suffered learning loss, relative, on a proportionate basis, it wasn't as large. And so that's an excellent point, Matt. So criterion 1 is pretty much all schools that were very high performing generally prior to COVID.
At least as rated by our accountability system, I'd say most schools in identified under method 1 and 3 are 4 and mostly 5-star schools.
Right, right. Yep.
Were there any other questions? Thank you, Mr.
I do
Harris.
not see any other questions right now.
Okay, let's come back to superintendent and see whether or not you want to continue on.
Okay.
So-
Let's move on. And so just next steps, you know, the school selection methodology, right? We have been working to refine that. And so we are hoping for approval on that. And so then we can begin to both continue our pilot and also continue to refine and strengthen the documents and such in our for a resubmission in December before the formal visits start in spring. The rubric will continue to be refined and further bring additional elements and strengthen existing elements related to blueprint aspects of a school visit, and you know, whether if it's a concentration of poverty campus, or looking at, you know, schools relate how the career ladder plays out at a school, the freshman on track indicator, those kinds of things, and making sure that's tight. Supporting materials, you know, every aspect of this matters, right? Like how you ask a question to a focus group, how the template and report looks, what the feedback looks like. You know, I told my team I will not forgive myself if it just looks like another you know, cookie cutter edu jargon report that doesn't really say anything at the end of the day. And a lot of these can turn out like these. And so that's, I mean, we're going to be visiting the lowest performing school in the state. What are you going to tell them? You know, what are you going to tell them? And so those things matter, and getting that feedback just right will matter. And so making sure we refine that and over time. And then reviewer calibration, that's just going to be a continued work. You don't just, you have to continue to work out, as I say. And, you know, principals have to do this with their observations. You know, people have to do this just all the time. You don't, like, what's a 3? I saw a 2, you saw a 1. Why'd you see a 1? I saw a 3. What is going on? You have to keep refining that, even if you've built a deep bench of experts. And so we're going to keep doing that. That's the one, that third one is something I do obsess a lot about getting right. So that's essentially next steps. And that concludes my first aspect of my presentation related to expert review team. So if you have any other questions or don't have any, I can move on. So I'll stop here.
Are there any, do you see at this point, Rachel? If not, let's move on. All right, let's go move on then. Mr. Chairman.
All right, so last time I gave you a little bit of preview, so there will be some repeat slides, so I'll move a little faster on our Maryland's teacher workforce. This time I'm going to give you a more fuller presentation on this. I'll stop at sections. This is a presentation I gave to the state board. I've also updated with some things as well. And, you know, I always like to benchmark things around national. And then I always like to just push on problems of practice as well and how people are responding in different places. And so, and I will also have current data for you on what vacancies look like in our state. You know, it is cool to say teacher shortage, but, you know, what I hope is gonna also be very cool is why and how can we solve that, and how can we, you know, have an oversupply of teachers and do that. You know, I've been getting a lot of calls from the press on what do I think about the teacher shortage, and you know, unfortunately there's not a lot of nuance, and so I hope to bring more nuance to this issue. So again, why this all matters, we know that high quality teachers threaten not having high quality teachers will threaten students' ability to learn really well, and that matters, right? Staff stability matters, retention matters. It costs districts money to constantly replace teachers. I can tell you that as just someone who's ran HR divisions, and it can be high as 21,000 in terms of having to replace teachers. Turnover makes it difficult to have a solid reputation for the profession, right? These headlines bring attention to the issue, but at the same time, the headlines can have a reverse effect of like, oh, I'm not going into teaching. And so we need to make sure the prestige of the profession is solid. And, you know, we have the blueprint in our arsenal to do that. New teachers are baby teachers. And so, they're still learning, they're still trying to get better. And so they tend to be less effective and less familiar with student needs. And so, when you're constantly turning over, you're creating a school or positions with lower tenure. Retention can span between 8 to 18%. We're kind of somewhere in the middle there. You'll see it. And then, of course, some turnover is unavoidable. Teachers retiring, teachers moving into administration, teachers pursuing another career. And the shortage concept is very different depending on where you are. And even within a specific county, it is targeted in different ways. So that's very important to know as well, and within subjects as well. So we'll deep dive into our data. So I'm going to hit on 5 different things: teacher workforce demand, the supply, the diversity pipeline, and then examples of how other states are responding, and then how we are leveraging the opportunities that we have in our state going forward. Let's jump right into workforce. I believe I shared this with you last time, but overall, if you just look at our attrition, it is held fairly steady over the last several years, and so it's important to remember that Maryland does have fairly high retention rate overall. It's 90%, and that has held steady. I think one of the things folks often say, shortage must mean massive quit rates. People are just quitting in massive numbers. That is not holding up. The quit rates tend to still mirror other years, but in terms of having a bench of people to hire for your new position and such, that's a different conversation. And so just get that sense. But within that 10% or so of attrition, there are inequities and disparities, and that's felt differently from different parts of our state. Here's what it looks like across school systems. So, it's higher in some areas: Dorchester 18%, Kent 17%. It is very different depending on where we are in the state. And so it's felt differently in the shore across the different systems, especially as well as in the core. So something to just kind of look at across our LEAs. And then here's what it looks like by years of experience, right? New teachers are the ones who are leaving. So that's a problem, right? 13.6% are leaving at less than 3 years of experience, which tends to, it's lower than national trends. The most recent NCES US Department of Data is about 17%. And again, that's felt differently. So you get a sense of who's quitting. Our teachers of color are leaving at higher rates. And so we'll talk more about diversity. And so Maryland is mirroring that trend as well. Nationally, teachers of color have a 18.9% turnover rate. And so that's higher. So it's absolutely crucial that we have strategies to not just build the pipeline, but also strategies to keep our teachers of color and what that looks like. And there is a concept known as an invisible tax that teachers of color experience. And I'll talk more about that when they do come into the profession and what causes a push out factor or quitting. And so we'll talk more about that today. Here's what it looks like in terms of the reasons. We have a reason survey that we do, as all LEAs give. The vast majority are leaving on voluntary resignation. So, or they're pursuing another job. And so it's not because the vast majority of teachers are getting fired or, a health emergency or retirement continues to be a significant number. So the bench does matter that we're building, but the voluntarily people are leaving. That's the highest. So that's the headline there is we have work to do in keeping people in the profession. Here's what it looks like in terms of years of experience. And again, voluntarily, our new teachers, teachers that are less tenured are leaving. And that's what they cite. And that could mean a wide variety of reasons, right? And so just to give you a sense of what that looks like across our state. Let me keep going. Here's what it looks like by race. So it runs the gamut, but as you can see, teachers of color have a higher rate of voluntary resigning compared to their white peers and Asian peers. So just that's mirroring other numbers that I've showed you when it relates to attrition rates broken down by race. Again, voluntary resignation. So that means they are saying, I do not want to do this anymore. And then here's what the vacancy rates look like right now. So as you can see, well, I'll show you in the next slide. Here's what it looked like at the beginning of the year. And so we'll talk about that. And so nearly all Maryland LEAs started the last school year with greater number of teacher vacancies compared to prior years. There was 2,000 teachers vacancies. And then nationally, 44% of public schools, so almost half of public schools reported having vacancies. And so just to give you, I always like to benchmark against national trends and what that looks like. So this is what the beginning of the year looked like. And then we decided to see what it looked like at certain time intervals. And so here's what you're kind of seeing: first day of school, last day of school, and then what it looked like we recently surveyed them again to see where they're at. So you're seeing that data snapshot. Again, 20 LEAs had an increased number of teacher vacancies over the course of the year leading up to August 2022. So it's, the hope is that you close that gap, but for some, the gap went up. And that's not a good thing at all, while others, it went down. So it's important to look at that. So that means that people are starting the school year with a long-term sub or a vacancy. And it is important to know that a long-term sub is not a permanent solution. That is still a sub. And they are absolutely crucial to what we do. But at the end of the day, you still have to fill that seat with a permanent slot. So just to give you a sense of what it's looking like this year, up to the most recent data collection. Teacher vacancy trends, what are we seeing? So across the 24 districts, nearly all have teacher vacancies as of August 15th. Over half of the districts had more teacher vacancies on August 15th at the end of the school year. So it went up for half of them. And special education continues to be a hard to staff area. It's been a hard to staff area even before the pandemic, and I'll talk more about that a little later. But that is a continued trend and challenge. And then you can see it by subject areas as well in terms of where school systems are. And then it also varies by region. So it's important to contextualize this across over time. So like Montgomery County, its resignations have held steady. Prince George's, it's actually less than previous years compared. It's still high, but it's less. It's not some kind of uptick that is unprecedented than what they've experienced before in previous years, even dating back to COVID. And then you're seeing what it looks like with some of our neighbors in Virginia. So, the teacher shortage challenge and vacancy is a localized challenge and nuanced challenge as well. So just to...
So let me ask a question, as you mentioned Montgomery County, because I've had a number of inquiries from parents and others, as well as teachers. There seemed to be a larger concern this year about it in Montgomery County. And what I heard anecdotally is that the problem is far worse than it had been in the past. What you described, it seemed to be inconsistent with it. So what is the takeout?
The reported number and everything else it's been steady. And so ultimately, what people say and feel and perception, ultimately you have to look at the numbers. And so the facts are that it is held steady. But what can be true at the same time is we're not getting applicants. Normally we would be able to fill by the first day of school. And so, school systems have vacancies leading up to the first weeks of school. Like, that's not a new thing, but like, you find a way to fill it and everything. So there's a challenge with filling staffing slots and having a bench. And then there's a challenge with substitutes as well. People had to raise sub rates and other things as well. So just to know, in terms of worse than any other year, the bench could be worse than that a year not having applicants, but in terms of roughly what the vacancy rate is, that is steady. And for Prince George's, that's lower, and those are facts. So that's what I would say to that. And so
let me go back to one other slide. The slide was I found pretty interesting. What you had at the beginning of the school year and what you had at the end of the school year. Can we go back to that again?
This one or this one? This one, yes, this one, yeah.
First end.
Yeah, first day, end of year, and then most recent snapshot of August 15th.
Okay, and let me now this slide represents, these are permanent hires.
Yes, these are teachers. These are certificated teachers, specifically teacher slots, not other vacancies in central office or things like that.
And so what you're saying is that mid-year, somewhere in between, you could have this amount of transitioning.
Yeah, so every school system has, in the spring, they do a process through their HR. It's very common to say, are you coming back or not? And then there's a date usually some school systems try really hard by mid-year to get people to fill that out. But with their bargaining units, it can go up to like a certain point in June. And so they might not find out that someone's leaving until like literally, and when that survey is completed, and then they don't come back. And so, yes, every spring you make an attempt to make sure you know who's coming back, but technically they don't have to let you know until even after the first day of instruction, the last day of school. And then ultimately those vacancies open up and you're like, oh my gosh, I had a vacancy that I didn't project for, or I didn't know that I was going to have that vacancy, so now I gotta build a sub a pool, or I already had a bench in line just in case. Sometimes people do pre-approval of a contract. This is what I used to do in San Antonio, and I would have a pre-approved set of elementary teachers anticipating this move, knowing that I would want to fill a vacancy and line them up. So
All right. Now, the last time we had this conversation, you mentioned that there was a twofold problem: the overall gross number of what we have versus particular subject areas, and you identified special education.
yes.
That you could have an overall a fairly consistent number, but if it's in particular fields, especially special education, you could be well off. Is that consistent around the country? And if so, what others are doing about that as well?
Yeah. So in this presentation, I'm going to talk more about that issue, and so that will be coming up. So great.
I apologize.
No. I've gotten used to you like probing questions. I'm like, I'm gonna get that Ike later on. So I appreciate that.
All right, no problem.
Yeah.
Dr. Lynch has a question.
Yep. And I'm almost done with this chapter. I got 3 more slides as a heads up.
Okay, well, why don't we let you go? I apologize. Let's go let me finish this. Then we'll come back to Dr. Lynch at the next question.
Okay, just really quickly. So here's what the numbers look like in terms of certification areas. The greatest number of educator vacancies are single subject certification areas when you aggregate and total them up. Special education continues to be a shortage area. This is reporting that we have to do, and it's gotten even tighter as part of the feds want this report as well. And then Maryland also has other vacancies in non-teaching positions such as speech pathologists and counselors, etc. Here's another unbundled view of it. Again, wide variety of subject areas, right? Most districts have vacancies. So the other one was at the individual level. Here's at the district level, right? Special education, early childhood, and then elementary. And so as you can see, the question is like, are we producing these types of teachers? Do we have the relationships with our institutions of higher ed producing what you need? But you got to also be like, have a smart crystal ball to make a prediction to make sure that you need that, and have an oversupply of special education teachers or that computer science teacher, right? Sometimes that one is very hard to fill, given, the pay in the private sector versus the public sector. Just quick takeaways. Attrition has held steady in Maryland over the last 5 years. Nearly all of our LEAs started the year with more vacancies. The last school year, teacher shortages are driven by local conditions, leading to a variance across our state. The most common vacancies are in single subject secondary areas. Special education continues to be a challenge, and teachers of colors leave our state, our profession at higher rates than their peers. Dr. Lynch.
Thank you so much. And looking at the trends, it seems like from 2019 until now, we've seen significant increases. We also saw an influx of ESSER dollars, which for a lot of our districts, they added teaching positions and counseling positions and things like that. And so I'm wondering if there's been any sort of a crosswalk in terms of overall enrollment, overall increases in positions. So like if it, 100 positions might look like a lot, but if you've added 500 positions, that were new, what is that net? So I'm wondering if there's been any sort of crosswalk to look at the impact of per pupil to student to teacher ratios as a result of this and the impact of new positions caused by ESSER.
Yeah, so you are definitely right on with that. Now, the State Department of Ed doesn't do recurring natural systematic collection of like, hey, how many new positions are you adding this year? That's not a thing we do. We get the report out. So if they added 5 more at the end of the day, that's 5 vacancies that they're reporting out to it. I'm not going to go say, is that 5 extra from what you had from the previous year? That would be a atypical ask, but it's something we could. But ultimately, nationally, people have been probing this issue more, and the nuance piece has been the blueprint is providing more people and funding and allowing you to bring down ratios, and then you have ARP ESSER that you can spend up to 2024 that's allowing you to add that extra counselors and everything else. And yeah, you don't have a pool. You're not getting people responding. And so yes, in many places that is what is also causing that shortage area. And so that has been what you're saying is playing out. But in some places, it's always been true regardless of what their allocations additions were. So yes, man, awesome, unprecedented federal funding. We can get another social worker to focus on mental health or reduce the counselor ratio. Man, there's no candidates or anything else. There's a shortage. And so that is true. That is playing out across our state as well.
Does the State Department track the per pupil ratio that in the teacher to student ratio?
We do. That's a federal data collection thing that we do, and we do publish that as part of our state report card, and we do track that and what that looks like. Yeah.
And is that based on existing teachers or teacher positions? So, like, if somebody had a vacancy, would the number still look lower?
Well, that is based on they are reporting on all of their elementary teachers, and they're doing an average and they're giving it to us. We will, whether they increase their class size somewhere and everything, ultimately we get it by LEA, and then we aggregate up and say our elementary average that year was 1, 2, etc. So technically, if you had to say you were Baltimore County and you had to take 2 classes and combine them or spread that one class across 3, and those 3 teachers who you already have bodies for have an increase in class size, that would drive up that reporting for that year. So
in that example, they would only report 3 teachers. They wouldn't report 4 because they actually had 4 positions in their FTEs.
Exactly, for the class size ratio reporting. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Dr. Doss has a question.
Thank you. Thank you. Just wondering, when we're talking about certain demographics and teachers, what is the recruiting strategy for recruiting teachers from our HBCUs? And is that particular strategy, does it need to be improved or revamped or anything like that?
So we have a whole chapter on diversity and everything, and I would say the answer is yes, 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 yes. And is it being done at scale? Well, I would say probably not. But I also want to have a conversation on what is tripping up our teachers of color in the process of becoming a teacher. So and so you could recruit, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of different things you have to pull off to be able to ultimately be hired. But we can talk more about that in the diversity pipeline. Have I done a separate report on HBCUs? I have not, but I am writing it down on future things to bring to the AIB to do a special focus on what that looks like. I believe MLDS submitted a report on teacher prep's efforts on recently, and I would hope if we maybe Rachel, you can get that over to her, and it looks at what the pipeline looks like across of our teacher prep programs on HBCUs and non-HBCUs and what they're producing and how that is working well or not. So they are required to publish that report, I believe annually. Correct me if I'm wrong going forward. Rachel.
Yes, that's a new annual report, and we didn't make that available, but we'll make sure to flag it for everybody again.
Okay, good. I think that would be good for us. Thanks.
Can I move on to the next chapter?
Yes.
All right. Let's talk about the supply. So what we are producing, we've looked at the demand side. Again, the people being interested in becoming teachers has been on a downward trend. And it's been happening for over a decade. And that is a problem. So if people want to talk about the teacher shortage, it's been years in the making. And so that's something to know, and we'll look at Maryland data. Traditional prep programs have felt a decline. Alternative preps have felt a decline. People interested in majoring in education has declined while other fields rose at the same time. And then Maryland's teacher prep program is mirroring national trends as well. And I'll dive into that data just to give you national context. And so just quick definitions. I always like to remind folks on the definitions. EPPs, right, our educator preparation programs. And then we have our traditional EPPs and alternative EPPs. There are currently 22 institutions of higher ed approved to operate the number of programs that you see. And then there are 11 programs and alternative structures that could be everything from your TFAs to Anne Arundel having a model with Anne Arundel County Public Schools, or Prince George's having its own model in partnership with its IHEs. And then there are where you are in the supply side, right? You are eligible, you've completed everything, and then what type of certificate you have. You know, you've achieved certain milestones, or you have not achieved certain milestones. So you could be a conditional, you still have to meet certain requirements, or you've met all your requirements, you've earned the professional certificate, or you've finished all your preparation requirements, so you are now eligible to jump into. So it's important to know what those are, because I'm going to give you data around those terms and what that looks like. This is how we track where people are. And so here's our teacher prep trends in Maryland. Over 9,000 in 2012, and where we are today. So less and less people are enrolling in teacher preparation. That is a problem. And also know that these people who are enrolled doesn't necessarily mean that they are staying in our state or jumping into the profession, right? These are just people. There was a great study done by Dan Goldhaber in Washington that found a third of people majoring in education don't actually go and become teachers. And so, and we could end up doing a study like that of ours. So just because you have those numbers doesn't mean they're staying in our state. They could be going Washington or DC or Virginia, etc., or leaving or doing something else altogether. And so just to show the trend lines, here is just just production versus need. So, you know, we are producing teachers, and you see what the production is there in that year, and then what the need was. But again, and Chair Leggett alluded to this because I've shared this before, doesn't mean what you're producing is what you need. And so, and doesn't mean that they're coming to your district as well. You know, our pipelines that like, I'm projecting 4 special education teachers that I'm going to need over the next 5 years. Hey, so-and-so community college, can you make sure that you are recruiting for that? And I share all this because I know we benchmark against international systems where teacher prep is highly centralized. And in Singapore, for example, they only publish slots for teacher prep for what they need. And so your applicant pool is like 3,000 for those 1,400 slots. So that creates a very competitive applicant pool. I'm not saying we're going to do that because I would probably not want to run for anything if I propose that. But I'm just saying I'm just going to keep it real on that in that regards and let you guys ponder that. But so one of the things that will be important going forward is we need to work better together and align and make sure we're producing what we need. So that's just my point there. Maryland's certification applicants, the takeaway here is we are an import state. 50% of our candidates, we still depend on imports. So again, so like that whole point, like not everyone's staying here. So we are importing a great number of teachers and we rely on import to fill our vacancy slots. And so that's an important thing to remember. Here is the massive increase, 136% of our conditional certificated teachers. And those teachers are basically teachers who have a bachelor's degree, and they are being hired on a conditional certification. They have to still go through interview protocols and everything else, and those vary across our systems. And then they are granted a conditional certification, and then they have a set number of years to fulfill those requirements. State Board took some action on this recently, and I'll talk more about this, but this has exploded. And it has exploded in other places as well, like Massachusetts and other places, but just something important to keep in mind. And I'm going to also show you the demographic breakdown of who this population is. Here's our school systems that rely on conditional certificated teachers. As you can see, which school systems bring people who, again, you have a bachelor's degree, you have to go through all the initial hiring and everything else. You come into the classroom, and then you have to fulfill certain requirements to cross the conditional to professional. And so as you can see, the school systems where that is something they rely on. More school systems are feeling the need to have conditional certificated teachers that normally were not used to having them, whereas our other systems may have been used to it. So I've talked to some of our superintendents, like, I didn't think I would need conditional certificated teachers this year, but I did. So just something to remember there. Just key takeaways on this as I end this chapter is, the number of people going into teacher prep is declining, and that's mirroring national trends. And conditional certification has increased, and that is something to keep in mind. I will stop here for this chapter for questions.
Took a quick glance at the number of conditional certification. Is there any consistency between certification and local LEA performance?
Well, I'll let you look at this slide, and so personally, I don't like to make that conclusion because that's not a scientific conclusion, because, I have hired rock stars through Texas style conditional certification, because you would have to run a randomized control trial to look at that. And we could look at that, but ultimately our high poverty systems, high majority minority systems rely on conditional certification. So that is not that's a problem that's been even before COVID. And so, and lower tenure teachers there are more lower tenure teachers in West Baltimore than in a school that is not in West Baltimore. And so these have been challenges in the making. So here's the performance of our systems, but I wouldn't make the correlation to just conditional certification. There's high poverty, high challenges, and other years in the making. There's more professional teachers in that system than conditional certificated teachers. So performance is driven by the majority of the teachers ultimately in the system. So it's difficult to just say, oh, it's because of that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Fagan, you had a question?
Yeah, I've just got a couple of quick questions. Superintendent, thank you for everything today. You had a slide back in the most recent year, the number of unidentified go one up, one more, that one. Right. What is that unidentified?
This one, or sorry.
No, go up one more.
Oh,
There.
this one. Oh, yeah, this is just a data reporting matter. We just could not tag that when we get that data for where they're coming from, we could not tag where they were because of just application issues. And so we have to report that. Yeah, that's all that is. Yeah.
That was just a clarifying question. And then a more substantive question. Of the teachers that are receiving conditional certification, I'd imagine some proportion of them go on to be fully certified and go on to great careers.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Do you have a sense of what proportion do not? And if we could stem the tide of that attrition, what impact that would have on the overall teacher count? Because the districts with the highest proportion of certified teachers are also the districts with the highest proportion of vacancies. And so I'm trying to get to root cause on vacancy.
Yeah.
How much of that is just empty seats versus the attrition in our certified teaching pool?
Yep. So I can give you when we get to like the demographic breakdown that's coming up in the diversity section on who makes up that conditional cert. Do I have right now in front of me how many 100 conditional certificated teachers start in Baltimore City? How many make it out? I don't have that number with me right now, but I will. That's a great question. But what I do know is the vast majority of are diverse. The vast majority of our Black teachers, and we know that the vast majority of people resigning and quitting and attrition rates are high for our lower tenure teachers, as well as high for our minority teachers. So that's trending with that regard. What that looks like by system, I can work on a customized report for that because it's an intriguing question. So and what you would have to drill down, like what happened to that teacher.
Sure.
So, like that question.
I think it's a good one just to say a little bit more and then I'll be quiet. A lot of times when we talk about recruitment, I think sometimes this is in any business or in any industry, we often miss the retention imperative. And I think of that conditional pool, if there's a retention issue there's more that we can do to support that population, particularly if they look and feel like the population of kids that we're teaching and educating. That feels really important. I've told this story 100 times, and I'm going to keep telling this story to my colleagues and to the public here. But my mom was a conditionally certified teacher, and her best friend was a conditionally certified teacher. And my mom passed that praxis and got fully certified by the skin of her teeth, went on to be department chair of special ed, served for 20 years, killed the game. Her colleague never did, and then we lost her. And I often think about those paths. And so I'm intensely interested if we have a lot of teachers of color who are conditionally certified in these high need districts, and we're losing a lot of them. I think we should ask ourselves what we can do to support and retain them, because I think it actually will show up in our recruitment numbers if we do better there. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Any other questions?
See some.
Yes, Dr. Lynch, and then Mr. Manko.
I had just a sort of, again, a technical question. Do you notice any trends in the conditional and who is drawn to the conditional certifications in terms of what is the content of which they are teaching? Is it special ed? Is it high school single subject, as you had talked about earlier? Are there any trends in where they are being placed once they are hired?
It runs the gamut. I don't have that report in front of you, but when I looked at it, it runs the gamut. It could be elementary, it could be high school, it could be a biology major who is coming in to be a biology teacher. So they clearly have certain levels of content, and we should find ways to reward that. And so I think there are progressive forward-thinking policies we can do there, but it could we try to avoid there is a crosswalk of if you have this major, then you are allowed to get a conditional on these subjects. You can teach that. We wouldn't do something like art for biology or something like that. And so, but there isn't like, oh, it is all just elementary or it's all English. It runs the gamut. These are career changers, right? These are people who pursued bachelor's in something, and they're like, man, I could not, it didn't work out with my communications major and whatever I thought I was going to do. So I'm going to teach. And so, and a lot of people find their career in teaching that way. And so there's CTE individuals as well, right? People who come to teach CTE. It runs the gamut. And I will tell you, it goes, it's more heavier on content and like traditional content than you would assume, like, oh, it must be like art teachers or it must be like, the auto mechanic teacher. It's not. It actually runs more so on content, but it runs the grade spans, it runs the traditional content, all of those things. But I can, get you work on.
No, you don't have to do that. I was just curious if something had sort of popped out at you. And I think my second question is the blueprint is really designed to address some of the things that you talked about of elevating the teaching profession as being one that is respected and that is enticing to bring new people to the field, but in a lot of different ways. And part of the blueprint, though, is to continue to hold those high standards. We also have the reality on the ground that we've had decreasing interest in teaching for well over a decade. And so my question to you is, what do you think the AIB should be considering as we have to help schools reimagine how to think about our human resources and how to think about how we're doing everything from scheduling to deploying resources with the reality on the ground? So how are we reimagining schools at the same time that we are attracting new people and holding high standards and advancing pathways to those high standards? Yeah. What are you thinking that we should be holding in our heads at this time?
Yeah. So I'll give you a shorter version for now, and then we go further in the presentation. There are some things I would definitely want to point out to when I'm in those slides. But your scheduling, your ratios, and everything. Ultimately, I want to say this part first. It's rooted in collective bargaining. Let's not forget that. That is very important. And so you can't simply say, I have a highly effective teacher, I'm going to increase the class size and give them 3 TAs, and also created a blended learning classroom, and they're going to do amazing things. That is like opportunity culture thinking. If you've, it sounds like you are aware of that. So, I'm going to do that version of it. And we've done that in other places that I've been in and everything. And that teacher willingly takes on that size. You make sure you get other supports in there with them, that in additional TAs and everything, or you find creative ways to leverage teacher interns. We need to start paying interns. We need to start paying teacher interns. Let's think about how we can create a permanent source for that. And so let's think about that. We need to train up our TAs, our educational support professionals. You can teach them to deliver quick hit science of reading lessons to a small group. We need to leverage tutoring corps that are not teachers, but are college students who are looking to do, make extra money, but at the same time, do creative things during the school day. You need to build in a lot of unique flex time into the school day that allows you to have self-paced learning, be able to use virtual, asynchronous and synchronous options as well. But you also need to be able to, and I will say, I do not believe Comar is in the way. And if someone tells me Comar is in the way, then I will get my crew of 14 people to join me to rewrite that one to open up creativity. They are open to stuff like that. But it is easier said than done, right? Like I would love to see more models like that and unique models. But I also want to be straightforward about collective bargaining and doing that. I'm not saying that collective bargaining can enable that to happen, but people have to be willing to have that conversation. So I would just share that. I think I gave you more than I wanted to give, but I hopefully that helps.
And Mr. Manco?
Yeah, so my first question is just piggybacking off of what Fagan raised about the teacher retention, and was curious if we had data at the school level to see if there's a disproportionate amount of churn that is coming from a handful of schools.
We do.
And yeah, and just if you could speak a little bit to that, if that is something that is very glaring within the data, that there's a handful of schools that are accounting for a lot of the vacancies year after year.
High poverty schools, majority minority schools. There's national research on this. As the diversity of a school increases, as the poverty trends increases, tenure begins to drop. Neighborhoods, schools that reside in, there is churn in West Baltimore. There is not churn in Clarksville, Maryland. There is churn in aspects of Montgomery County, and there is not churn. There is not churn in Worcester County. There is churn in Somerset County. And so it is in different ways, but predictors to it deal with student populations that bring on more challenges and everything else. We do have to report data to the feds on what tenure, what highly qualified, and highly qualified is in this sense defined by whether they had a certification or not and what their tenure is. And we do that. I did that report presentation to the state board. I'll pass that on to you, but it tracks with what I just told you with. It just does. It does. And that's a pre-COVID challenge and everything else. That's why I always say teachers teaching at such campuses should be paid like rock stars. All teachers should be paid like rock stars, but can we pay them the premium rock star rate? That's what I would just put it that way. And there's ways to do stuff like that as well. So
the second question is, I think clearly in the long term, trying to figure out ways to do a lot of this work in-house and, leaning into the grow your own models is, in the long term, the way to go. But traditionally being an importer, a state that imports its teachers, wanted to see if you could talk a little bit about the blueprint and what it does around teacher compensation, around career ladders. Like, this is all this is a fluid national market, right? Yeah. And, teachers that are currently in Michigan that are deciding whether they want to go to Pennsylvania, Virginia, or Maryland, right? Like, it seems like there are elements of the blueprint that should put us in a much more competitive space for importing those teachers than a lot of other states that haven't taken these, really dramatic moves to try to, elevate the profession, to increase compensation. Yep. So if you could talk a little bit about that and, what this means on a competitive landscape nationally, and, what we can do to kind of market ourselves nationally as a place where people who care about teaching and want to be respected and compensated well can come to.
So do you see the title of my next chapters that are coming up? So if you let me move on, and because I gotta have my slides with my review, right? So if you let me, if I can do that, I would. I promise to address many of the things you said. Probably not fully, but a lot of what you said. So I do plan to hit on that today. So can I move on from this chapter?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Thank you. So let's talk about the pipeline for building a diverse teacher core. Well, nationally, we are not very good at this and have not been. Some places are, and I have seen that and experienced that. But nationally, we are not. The student population has diversified. The teacher core is not. It is still majority white, female, 70-80%. And then people going into higher levels of education, right? Less and less people are interested in teaching, and you see what that looks like. Wanting to go into, to pursue a 4-year degree, and their interest in wanting to become a teacher. The interest in terms of having a diverse pipeline is not very strong. Here's what Maryland looks like. So Maryland mirrors those national trends. So from 2012 to 2022, as you can see, Maryland, these are our existing teachers, right? Over the past 10 years, less than 30% of Maryland teachers were teachers of color. It is not a number that is dramatically increasing, just to that's the takeaway there. Here's what our new teachers look like, the pipeline. So are we making a dent in that? Some rise in it, but overall nothing dramatic. And so that continues to be a challenge, right? The greatest share of newly employed teachers are white. Maryland's new teachers do not reflect the demographics of our student population. And let's look at it another way. So attrition, I've already shown you this, but I like to juxtapose slides sometimes with the new slides. So who's quitting? Our teachers of color are quitting at higher rates. So our pipeline, we don't have a deep pipeline, but they're also quitting higher rates. So the teachers you do get, there are challenges and issues around that. And we'll talk more about some of those things and what that looks like. And again, voluntarily resigning. This just juxtaposing a repeat slide. We've talked about this, and so I'm going to move on. We did a lot of roundtables. If you may have heard that I love roundtables, and we did a teacher diversity roundtable, and this was a teacher from one of our systems that talked about that invisible tax. And this is a Latina teacher who, she loves teaching and everything else, but she also has to shoulder translation for her school. Can you come and translate this? Can you come and do this? Can you do this? And so that's a double-edged sword. Is she getting additional pay to do that? Nope. And so is she doing it out of the goodness of her heart? Yes, but these are subtle things that we don't pay attention to. And then of course there's things like microaggressions and other things as well. And so we'll talk about that. Here's what it looks like, the race of the teacher and our student population broken down, just to see what trend line look like nationally. So as you, not nationally, in our state, in our own state. So as you can see, we are just not closing the gap, and we have work to do. And so it's not something that is budging in dramatic ways. Here's what it looks like in terms of our counties, the gap. So the gap between their students and the diversity. So one way sometimes people measure when they set diversity targets and goals, this is one way to look at it. So as you can see, the gaps vary from our local school systems and what that looks like. And so we have work to do because, it's what diversity conversation looks like in Garrett is different than what it looks like in Montgomery County, right? So, and diversity can also be beyond just race, male teachers in elementary, for example, and what that looks like. And so moving on. Just a reminder, David Blaser, I talked about him last time, and just in our own backyard, we have a national thinker and leader whose research is respected on this. It's becoming a consensus at this point. This is not just having a role model who looks at you. This is a student achievement strategy. And it's a win-win for everyone. White students benefit, Black students benefit, and it impacts so many different things. It's not just test score outcomes, college going rates. It's also the belief gap, right? I believe you can do better. here, take this paper that I gave you a C on, and I'm gonna give you another chance to try to push it to a B. It's that piece, getting that second chance, that third chance. It's how discipline is implemented. It's all of those things. And so this is not just seeing someone who looks like you and feeling good about that. It is that too, of course, but it is much more. Here's an analysis that we did. If you are a Maryland student within a 3-year period, how likely is it for you to see a teacher of the same race? And so you can see, looking across 3 years of data, white students will have the same race teacher for 3 years straight. About half of Black students may have a Black teacher, and then it gets much less with our Asian students and Latino students. So, you know, just having one in your educational experience is a powerful method as well, and people have run that data. So just another, I like to again bring in a micro level data points, and so we did a teacher diversity roundtable, and you know, just the power of seeing someone who looks like you and what that does for you, and then the role model for that experience. And so it just means something to students and everything else. And so just something to think about as well. So that was a powerful statement from a recent roundtable. Let's look at the demographics of our preparation programs. As you can see, alternative prep is much more diverse than traditional prep in terms of our most recent data collection. And so double the rate in alternative prep versus traditional prep settings for people coming. So alternative preparation becomes a mechanism to diversify the profession, as we also have our 4-year traditional prep models also continue to step up on this challenge as well. Here's what it looks like in terms of completers. So these are the people who are eligible now to be, you know, they went through the program. Again, as you can see in alternative prep, that much more higher in terms of people. The first one was enrollment. This one is eligible, right, to step in to the classroom. And so as you can see, much more higher in alternative prep, which can also be done in partnerships with institutions of higher ed. For example, Anne Arundel Community College does ones with Anne Arundel, than our traditional prep. So this is now persisting through the program. And here's what conditional certification looks like. So I previewed this, and so now you can see who our conditionally certified teachers are. They are predominantly Black, and so what that means is conditional certification is a method to diversify the profession. It's one method, one strategy, but it does exist. But it's just something to look at, obviously, in terms of that entire experience. Here's just another example of an invisible tax from the roundtable. I had to change my hair, they told me. It was a little distracting. Talk about little microaggressions that they experience, you know. And so this was someone who had braids, and definitely, you know, distracting to who? And so just things to think about. So it is one thing to bring them in. It is one thing to keep them and bring them and develop them and support them and everything else that other teachers don't have to think about sometimes. Here's the key takeaways. Many students of color may never have a teacher of the same race. The teaching workforce has remained persistently white. Alternative prep is a mechanism to diversify the profession. Alternative prep programs can be developed within a district with various partners. Conditional certificate is an opportunity to diversify the pool. So what can we do there? And then, you know, increasing diversity among teachers is a student achievement strategies. Black students having just one Black teacher by 3rd grade were 13% more likely to enroll in college, and those having two were 32% more likely. These are not just marginal impact. This is a powerful statistics, and this is these are gold standard studies in terms of methodology and such. I will stop at this chapter before we go into what people are doing, and then we will end on what the blueprint presents and other things as well. Any questions on this chapter?
Yeah. Are there any? Rachel, if not, we'll go on.
I don't see any hands.
Okay, let's go.
All right. So here are some things that our people are doing across the country to support the teaching profession. And so in Colorado, they are opening pathways that are just not limited to licensure approaches, the traditional licensure exam, but they are also opening up things that can count in lieu of. So coursework review, submission of a portfolio, GPA. But the other thing that they are doing is they are paying teacher interns. They are paying them $22,000 in stipend. So they're creating a permanent a fund to be able to do that. That is something we should think about because, you know, when you are a teacher intern, you are also still having to be worrying about life and other things as well. So while also doing going through your teacher experience, and we know how historical inequities play out on how who may have to work and pay rent and bills and other things while also working through your classes and such. New Jersey, which is a highly affluent state, does fairly well on NAEP in just taking absolute performance. They just recently opened up a pilot program that allows districts to hire 10% of their staff using 3 different methods. You can use GPA, licensure, or subject matter credits, but you have to apply to the state. You have to say, I want to do this. Here's what I'm going to guarantee to ensure rigorous induction, rigorous evaluations, and it has to be within one of these 3 categories. So it's a tightly controlled pilot, not just you all get to do this and you have to apply and you could get denied. And so this is something New Jersey has opened up. Montana recently passed some recent flexibilities. They decided to evolve their licensing rules to allow for GPA, portfolio experiences. They also, for their CTE teachers, they are looking at prior learning assessments. I was just talking to Dr. Williams at Montgomery College. It's something he is passionate about. How do you give credit for life experiences in addition to your bachelor's? And how do you do that in a rigorous way? And then also creating pathways to allow teachers to level up. So, you know, I'm a teacher, I want to teach dual credit. How can I add that to my license and make sure that is not a complicated process? So that is something that is happening. Here is Minnesota. Minnesota recently passed pretty explicitly targeted bill to diversify Minnesota's teaching corps. And so $10 million for Grow Your Own, specifically with a focus on teachers of color. The district must ensure that the percentage of participating teacher candidates of color must be the same as or be greater than the percentage of students of color in the district. So you don't get to tap into this money if you do not explicitly seek to diversify your profession. $400,000 for Come Teach in Minnesota hiring bonuses. So sign-on bonuses, responding to the times, right? Like being able to compete with sign-on bonuses for the private sector and things like that. $4.5 million for mentoring and teacher retention grants for teachers of color. $2 million for this collaborative, bringing in institutions of higher education who want to join in and solve this problem of not having a diverse pipeline. And $750,000 for Black Men Teach, which is a nonprofit that focuses on, after they are in the profession, how do you make sure you build a culture to be able to keep them? So just something to look at as well, just so you understand that. So explicitly focus on diversity. Here is what Hawaii did. Hawaii has done something interesting where special education, and so Chair Leggett talked about, is this a national issue? Special education is a national challenge to fill. So they created, basically said, we're going to pay our special educations more. We're just going to pay them more. And if you, and we're going to pay them an additional $10,000 more. It is more than marketing. The money matters. And since the pay raise in 2020, an additional 300 licensed special education teachers are now teaching. Before the incentive, nearly 30% of special education teachers were vacant or staffed by teachers without the appropriate license. This number is now less than 15% today. So this is just a real life, like what it does. So, and we have many things in our arsenal over time that will kick in, but just this is a differential for special education teachers to be able to hook them in. And so just an example of what a state has done. Another thing that is happening, I would be remiss if I did not share this. States are moving away from certain aspects of how they used to prepare teachers. So TPA is a portfolio-based assessment that New Jersey, New York, Washington and Georgia, not George Washington, Georgia and Washington would use, and they are moving away from that. It is something that has been tripping up their teachers, especially minority candidates. It costs a significant amount, and their studies are coming out that just the correlation between effectiveness is not very strong. And so that is something that they're doing, and instead focusing on their own state level version of induction or their state level version of portfolio. Massachusetts has its own state version of an induction or portfolio process versus outsourcing it to an EdTPA and what that looks like. Here is Massachusetts that did something very interesting. This is a law that is about to pass. It is definitely about to pass. One of my closest friends is chief of staff to a member in their assembly there. They are passing something called the Educator Diversity Act. It just has not worked through their traditional method of being able to diversify the profession. As you can see the numbers, they have not been closing the gap. And so 80% of white test takers pass the test. MTEL, Massachusetts has one of the most rigorous tests. It is literally in our law where we are to benchmark against that, compared to just 50% of Black test takers and 62% of Latino test takers. What Educator Diversity Act does is establishes alternatives to the MTEL pathway by 2024 and provides safeguards for negative impact of certification on candidates. And the way they did it is they actually brought in Dan Goldhaber, who is a gold standard researcher who looks at this stuff, and looked at MTEL's effectiveness. And they looked at things like value added and others and compared it to people who came in through other methods, because they had a pilot where they looked at how teachers were doing if they allowed other versions to validate that teacher is ready. And what they saw is those teachers who did not do well on the MTEL, but came in through an alternate method, did as well. And so what they have decided to do is go all in to open up another option. And it also creates a data diversity dashboard. So no more like feel good, let's diversify the profession. There will be targets, and it requires uniformity around hiring and promotional practices, because that was problematic that they saw in districts that was causing churn. And then it creates a educator diversity grant fund. And so just, the state teachers union president has said this bill is just the beginning of dismantling the obstacles that are in the way of educators of color seeking to become certified teachers. And so here is something was brought up. We are a high import state. So there is this national consortium forming around teacher mobility compact. There's been compacts before, but they've been loosely acknowledged. This one's going to be a compact with teeth. It actually requires the legislator of each state to pass something to open it up. And it's essentially a commitment that if a teacher comes from a compact state, you treat them as a teacher coming into your state, but you're not going to trip them up with additional requirements. And so this is something we should look at as a high import state of whether or not we should be part of. It would be a legally binding agreement. So hence why it requires legislative action. And you can, right now they're in the planning phases. There's a whole survey and everything else. So I would encourage you to look at that as something I would recommend that we do look at as we think about it. Like, would I want a compact with Massachusetts? I think I would, and so come on down. I hire you, you're in. And so professional license, right? Would I, and sometimes I would want a compact coming from a specific district because I know they have rock star teachers. And so something to look at in terms of being able to solve things. Financial incentives, you alluded to this, Joe. So it is not just about pay. It is also about life, housing. More than a third of checks go to housing. So teachers in Connecticut can get mortgage assistance, and it's very simplified. I have a friend who teaches in New Haven, and he was able to get a great interest rate and support for down payment, committing to teaching in a high poverty school in New Haven. And as you can see, teachers working in identified priority school districts are graduating from a reform district, which is a low performing school system, or HBCU are eligible for a lower interest rate and down payment assistance. And this is something that has been making progress for them. New Mexico also has a loan repayment program. We have some as well, and we'll talk more about that a little later. And again, it is specifically targeted, right? It's high needs disciplines, special education, bilingual education, low performing schools, teachers from underrepresented backgrounds. Wisconsin has a minority teacher loan program to provide tuition support. We know it's also about helping our teachers graduate debt-free, and are close to being debt-free. And so how can we do that? Especially candidates of color, given historical inequities of wealth and everything else that I don't have time to go into today. But basically, there are things happening across the country as it relates to this. Here is a model. We have something similar with different requirements, but Arizona Teachers Academy Scholarship essentially offers you a full ride, and it is something that you get right off the bat when you enroll in basically your freshman year of college. You have to apply. Several universities participated in it. So Arizona State University, who has been making interesting strides around just innovative practices, this is what you have to fulfill in order to get in. You have to be top 25% in your class, or 3.0 GPA, or ACT 22, or SAT 1120. Or if you don't meet any of those, we'll look at you in another way, perhaps. Or. So just something to look at. And so what has the impact been for the Arizona Teachers Academy Scholarship? And essentially, the number of years you commit to teaching will continue to wipe down your debt. So if you keep going, so we'll ultimately zero that out. And as you can see, the numbers have exploded. So it initially started with, it was a state level law, and then it has thousands, close to 1,000 teachers enrolled. And you can go in and link and click it in and see the demographics of those teachers. It is contributing to diversifying the profession, and the persistent rate has been in the high 80s, 90s in terms of people completing. So just something to look at, and what they are doing to be able to be successful in that. Earn and learn models, right? Grow your own is a strategy, right? Taking a long-term approach, and earn and learn models really are attractive. It's a version of alternative prep, especially candidates of color. There was a great study done by TNTP looking at several grow your own models across the country, and by RAND, and looking at programs like TNTP and others who run alternative prep, and what that has done. And so they are seeing that it is helping to bring in teachers of color into the profession. And then apprenticeships are becoming a thing in teaching. Tennessee did the first one, all the way registered up to the Federal Department of Labor. It is something that we have supported through Maryland Leads as well. And so, and it is also scaling. And it has the double effect of 45% of our graduates graduating with a credential or an apprenticeship. So you can also support that goal as well, while also supporting our teacher pipeline and what that looks like. I just wanted to do a quick roundup on teacher effectiveness predictors. We could debate about this and different things, but ultimately, there are many things that contribute to teaching quality. Positive traits, things like, social emotional habits of mind, life satisfaction. And there are strong studies around that, looking at teachers who are more, they have everything else around their life is going well, they are more likely to be successful. The licensure, licensure can be predictive, but it is not a slam dunk. It can be mixed. It can be strong for some subjects, and it could be completely off for other subjects. So, and Dan Goldhaber is a great, he also has studied National Board. National Board uses his research to make some points about its effectiveness. And so if you wanted to do a deep dive with that, I would highly encourage you to invite him. And then of course, matching effects, diversity, and the impact of diversity and what it does. And just here's a aggregate study that Dan Goldhaber did around just the licensure impact. And again, most systems require it. There is a reassessment happening, as you saw nationally, around the use of licensure as the only way. And the link can be weak, modest, strong, depending on subject and what that looks like. And again, I would ask you to dig yourself, and I always put sources in the bottom and things and what that looks like. Here is something else that is on the horizon. The blueprint calls for standardizing induction. And I like to lean on induction. Those first 3 years should be the most high stakes. Like, you are a new teacher, whether you're conditional or from traditional prep, you should have a guaranteed mentor who's a rock star, who has free release time to coach you and everything else. And ultimately, we hope to have those mentors from the career ladder, but we should also find them now too. And essentially the power of mentorship. So you have a mentor, you have your probationary period, you basically go your 3 years. And at that 3-year period, you should be able to say, man, you are a professional teacher, and I deem you a professional teacher, and your mentor signs off on this. And the power of mentors are very strong. And also other factors, school organizational context, the type of school you're in, the type of PLC you're in, who you're surrounded by, do you have to play social worker more often than you teach? And then mentorship is so powerful that the school could be in disarray, but if the mentor is a rock star, then you can begin to mirror your mentor, right? And it has impact up to level of a third-year teacher's effectiveness level based on how strong your mentor is. You know, I credit my ability to teach well to my mentors, and I was fortunate to have great mentors. Sometimes it could be a mixed bag, and so for me, I was grateful for who I had in Los Angeles to be able to do that. So I really we're going to promulgate induction regs, and we're going to have to set a guaranteed floor across our systems and make sure that this is funded while this experience. To me, this is the thing that should be the most high stakes. Key takeaways for Maryland. Many states are taking action to create multiple rigorous pathways to certification. Not relying on just certification exam. Grow your own programs are a strong approach to recruiting more people of color. The interstate mobility, teacher mobility compact is something we should look at. I do believe we should look at it. Strategic incentive programs, loan forgiveness, scholarships, other things, not just supporting them becoming a teacher, but other things like graduating with less debt, helping them, buy homes, other things do matter as well. And then limiting entry to just one funnel of a high stakes licensure exams, I think does not fully grasp the other career elements that matter. And so just something to look at as well. And I can keep going with Blueprint, or it's just stop here.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation overall. We don't have much time, but if there's some burning questions that one or two need to ask, we can do so now, because we have a second presentation that may cover a couple of these items from a local perspective. Is anybody with hands up, Rachel?
No.
Okay. Superintendent, thank you so very much for
The power through it. And I'm not rushing through the Blueprint one because I do not love and breathe the Blueprint. So, so it is because I want to give you your time. So Blueprint is doing many, many, many things. Raising base pay to $60,000. I think we got to find a way to fast track that and make sure no school system experiences a slowdown on that or complicated. I know I might be saying some things that have a lot of debate around it, but I believe we should do that. You saw what happened in Hawaii with their special education teachers. National board, right? We are incentivizing national board, $10,000 for national board. If you teach at a low performing school, another $17,000. Teacher leadership opportunities, really benchmarking and national, international systems, allowing people to stay in the profession without becoming an administrator. You could be a mentor and still teach. You could be a mentor and develop. You can still teach and develop curriculum and do other things as well. And then reimagining the school day, right? To increase contact time between teachers so they can truly do lesson studies similar to like what they do in Japan and other places, and obsess about like, that play, like how did it go, that like how did you pull that off with your students? Like I want to know, and what did you do, and please help me do it. And the career ladder's coming in 2024, phase 1 being adopted, and then ultimately being fully adopted over the coming years. The blueprint, I am changing the face of the department. It is literally the blueprint era, down to the blueprint logo. And so we have launched the marketing campaign, very targeted. I am headhunting in Washington and California because they have a lot of national board certified teachers, and social media and Facebook and everything allows you to do those things, and they're willing to relocate. So I hope that, when national board certified teacher in Washington is just Googling stuff, Maryland is in their face. And so I want that to happen. And so we are doing a whole campaign. And here's just the look and feel. But, I have been blessed to be able to inherit a team that has people who have been untapped to do amazing things. And so they can definitely do a modern look and feel and design and what it looks like. So I'm excited about that. But again, it is not just marketing, but you could look good doing it as well, and as you should. And so, and then here are different grant programs that exist in the state. This is a grant program that exists to help institutions of higher ed to diversify, to work to help diversify their pipeline. I can't tell you how it's going because I have not. This is administered by MHEC, but I'll let you think about what that looks like. Here is a loan assistant repayment program, the Nancy Grasmick Teacher Award. It does target teachers in specific subjects. I can't tell you because there isn't a report I couldn't find immediately that looks at, how many people are taking this on, and is it easily grasped? Do people actually know about it and what that looks like? And so this is something that I think we need to look at. Here is the Teaching Fellows for Maryland Scholarship Program. This is going to dramatically increase in funding. And this is essentially looks to give people a full ride to be able to teach. I would say we should look at the requirements. Do we make it a little too convoluted? Something to look at, especially for diversifying the profession. Arizona takes an or approach. Are we taking too much of an and approach? Just something to think about. Here's what the recent numbers look like. This one I did bother Secretary Fielder for. I was like, I want this data, please. I want this data. And so here's what it looks like. As you can see, the money is going to dramatically increase. Hopefully the enrollment and disbursement does dramatically increase, and you could see what the racial breakdown of those teachers look like. 35 white, 14 black, and 6, and then it has increased. It has doubled to the next year, so something to look at from fiscal year 2020 and 2021. And just other requirements of the blueprint, and this is where I'll end for today. Is that LEAs are required to evaluate their hiring practices. Those reports came in recently. Are they really reassessing their interview protocols and what that looks like, and their to ensure that they are retaining their candidates of teachers of color and what that looks like. AIB is going to examine school level diversity. MLDS does a report. That's the report that we talked about. We are going to look at whether or not what are we doing a good job to increase our diversifying our profession, and then MSD shall monitor and assess whether or not our new requirements are having an adverse effect on the diversity of the teacher pool. And I'll just stop there with this slide. Sorry, I've got to give my state boards something. I forgot about this slide. Last slide, I promise. Essentially, our state board recently decided to give some breathing room for our conditional Conditional Teacher Certification, and as well as our resident teachers to open up something that's been true before the pandemic. 4-year programs are able to look at GPA, and that use of that GPA pathway to enroll people into a program at 4 years really rely on. But our alternative prep, we didn't give them that option. So we opened up that option for alternative prep to be able to use GPA in lieu of the licensure approach. And then for our conditional certified teachers, we gave them a longer window. You had 2 years to do all your courses and pass your license exam, but given COVID and everything else, we decided to give them a longer window, a 4-year window to be essentially to do that. And there's been an immediate impact in our systems. Baltimore County has reached out to their conditional certified teachers who had an effective evaluation and everything else. They just got tripped up on coursework or the licensure exam, and is inviting them back to be able to bring them on. And so just something as a current temporary solution, long-term solution are going to lie in our teacher regs and other things as well. Everything else is Maryland Leads. You know what we did through Maryland Leads, and we launched Grow Your Own programs, offered staff retention bonuses and things like that. And with that, I am going to stop and drink some coffee. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you for a very thorough presentation. One of the things that I think we should look at is there are an awful lot of the smorgasbord of options of things that we can do from a variety of states. But I think the better approach may be that we put together one consistent plan to say, here's our marketing, retention, short-term, long-term program into one clear policy position so that we know precisely what we are doing and not constantly going back and forth to other things that we have not tried. So that it's a one policy position that we have that encompasses all of those things that we think are, quote, doable, affordable, and can get us some of the results that we want. At some point, we need to come to grips with putting all that together. That may change over a period of time, but that's the portion that I would like to see us get to, that we've got one complete policy document that addresses all of that together, that may pick and choose between the various things that you just suggested.
Agreed. I definitely agree. I think we should look at everything and have, a single perspective, but we should be able to look at everything, especially our scholarship programs and other things that teach. Everything is this moment. We have induction regs coming. We have the master teacher regs coming. You guys have your comprehensive plan coming. The blueprint implementation plans for districts are coming. You don't get this moment back, and you have federal dollars in the mix. So we have kind of an interesting window. And we can lean on a lot of different lessons learned from across the country and things like that.
Thank you. We're going to have to move a little fast here. Now, again, thank you for your very thorough presentation. You've given us an awful lot to look at and to contemplate as we go forward. I think that there are some wonderful ideas that are out there, and that we can learn and adopt from them and put together the overall policy statement that we want to make for Maryland in this particular area. We will go now. I was going to
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to ask before we move on to the next panel, did you want
vote at this point in time?
Yes.
Okay. We had a discussion earlier about the methodology and whether we would adopt it. There was not a motion made, but I'm going to take the liberty of the chair to make a motion that we adopt the methodology as to the teacher evaluation and review. One quick question though, this is only through what period of time now? Do we need to put a date on that or around that?
This would be for the 22-23 school year. The school selected methodology for the expert review teams.
All right, so the time frame would be 22-23. And so I'll formulate that into a motion. Is there a second to the motion?
Second the motion.
Okay, been moved and properly seconded. Is there any discussion on the motion methodology? Okay, I hear no discussion. All in favor of the motion, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Opposition? Hearing none, the ayes have it. Thanks again, and thank you, Mr. Superintendent.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Superintendent Bolson, Superintendent Williams, Mary Pat, I'm sorry, I'm just long-winded. I just had to get through my presentation, so I appreciate your guys' patience. Thank you so much. I'll see you guys. Bye. Thank you.
We'll now have a presentation from the superintendents, our local superintendents around the state. We have with us today Dr. Sean Bolson from Harford County and President of the Public Schools Superintendents Association of Maryland. Dr. Darrell Williams, Superintendent of Baltimore County Schools, who's the Secretary. Karen Action, Chief Financial Officer of Charles County Public Schools. And Ms. Leslie Pellegrino, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, Chief Financial Officer for the county. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Mr. Bolson. Dr. Bolson, and have you start with your comments.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Chair Leggett and the rest of the IAB. I really enjoyed the superintendent's presentation. I think there's a lot in there that the superintendents could really get behind, and we'd love to work with you and providing some of the local color for some of the things he was talking about today, because there's a lot of good information there. Mr. Leggett already introduced the other panelists. I believe Dr. Williams is going to follow me, and then we're going to move on to Ms. Acton and Ms. Pellegrino to kind of wrap it up, talking about the funding. I wanted to kick off my comments in a slightly different part of the blueprint today. I wanted to talk about Pillar 4. I mean, one of the things we want to do as superintendents is we want to be able to share some of the successes. And Pillar 4, so more resources for students to be successful. And in Harford County, we really call that our student supports pillar, is a place where, and I think many of my colleagues would agree, this is an area where our school systems, our communities have really made a lot of progress. I think we had a head start on a lot of this, and I think we feel, at least in my district, we have very active, I think very high functioning, cross-functional teams working in each of the pillar areas. But our student supports pillar, the energy there, they're just really hopping, and there's great ideas and there's great things coming out of it. And I feel like they're off to probably the quickest start of the 4. So I wanted to talk about some of those. And, so when we look at this area, so the blueprint really, some broad goals, broad and sustained supports for schools serving high concentrations of students living in poverty, student access to needed prevention, health, and social services, and of course, increased support for English language learners and special education students that focus on, those special populations. So one segue from Mr. Choudhury's presentation, because I think this ties together some of what he was talking about, where special education is one of the areas that we have so much work to do there. I heard a stat recently that in the state of Arizona, you heard about Arizona a lot today, they have 35,000 people certified to teach who are not working in their classrooms. So part of the challenge they're working on is, we may not have as big a teacher shortage, but we have a shortage of people willing to teach. And I don't know exactly what the data like that looks like for Maryland, but there's a similar phenomenon occurring in special education. In Harford County, one of the things we did, and we've done pretty well with hiring, is we moved very quickly in offering people open contracts and things like that to get them in the door. We have many, many teachers certified to teach special education who are teaching in general ed classrooms. I'm not going to force them to move over and lose them because they're really fantastic teachers. And so, to suggest that you're only allowed to teach in special education, that we'd be kind of shooting ourselves in the foot a little bit. But incentives to keep them in special education, and when we were working through the details of the stipend for national board certified teachers this year, I think the superintendents quickly said if there were one thing that could really impact our teacher retention in special ed, because we have a lot of people certified for it, would be an equally appealing stipend to keep them in that special education classroom, because that is an area that's the hardest area every year to staff. And so that's a little bit of aside from the comments of where I was going, but this is part of this is how do we address those special populations? Is that is a population we spend a great deal of time and energy and resources on, and we're excited about. There's a lot of good work going on there, but retaining the teachers is something that we're constantly working with. So let me get into the pillar a little bit more. So one of the foundational elements of the pillar, and one of the areas where we got a head start because it came out in the first year of funding, was the community schools or the concentration of poverty schools. And a couple of great things have happened there. I'm actually coming to you today. I had a school visit at Joppatown High School, and Joppatown High School is soon to be a blueprint community concentration of poverty school. In Harford County, we use the Maryland Leads grant to forward fund 4 schools. So we have 7 schools approved as concentration of poverty schools. We use Maryland Leads funds, knowing that the next 4 schools in line will be within the 2 years, which captures the funding for Maryland Leads. So we actually now have 11 schools experiencing the benefits of the community school and the concentration of poverty. And when I had a chance to talk to this principal, this is our most impacted high school. It's the only high school we have in concentration of poverty. And I got to hear the principal talking about how her community school specialist is now bringing together all these resources to support students that she's never had. And they are energized and ready to go. And they have a lot of students that need to catch up. But that work being fully staffed, I mean, for us, when I talk about resources, they have the community school specialists, but there's social workers, there's pupil personnel workers, counselors, behavior coaches, school safety liaisons, which is something that we've just added, and then, in some cases, additional psychologists. So enhancing our support for mental health in our students is a huge part of the community schools. I talked a little bit about special education with the staffing. I also talked ESOL. I mean, both we had a very successful summer program for both special ed, but also for English language learners. And one of the things we found, and then this is a carryover to one of the other pillars, the 9th grade tracker is something we've been moving very quickly on because that's one of the big, to-do items on our list. Our 9th grade tracker is helping us find, in a much sort of quicker, more deliberate way, ways to support our students in those special populations, because you can imagine they're impacted in 9th grade. So we're seeing the benefits from one group's work showing up in the other. So we're excited about that. The next thing I'd like to talk about is some of the, the trauma-informed care and the mental health work. And I've organized my comments a little bit into the pre-blueprint, things that we had begun working on prior to the blueprint starting. But then the next one is because of blueprint. What are those things that, we were doing before? We'd maybe planted the seeds and started the work, but then because of what's going on in blueprint, here's how it's accelerated. And I have a number of examples then. I'll run through them very quickly. So prior to the blueprint, we've been very aggressive in putting mental health supports in place in all of our schools. So all of our schools have a provider. In fact, every one of our 55 schools has at least one provider of mental health services, an outside provider who has time during the school week and they're there, or their physical presence in the school. Because of the blueprint and the relationships we've had with these providers, we've increased the supports where we have 10 different providers covering all 55 schools, and 12 of our schools have at least 2 providers now in their school offering those services because of the increased demand. On another front, because of the blueprint, we were mandated to hire the mental health specialists. This strengthened our relationship with our local health department. And out of that, they helped us find some grant funds. They funded a director of health and wellness to give us an even greater focus on our relationship with them. So, that's strengthened. Prior to the blueprint, we offered mental health training to our Hbcus staff. Because of the blueprint, we're now reaching deeper into the community to expand our question, persuade, refer training, the QPR, which is essentially a suicide prevention training, and youth mental health first aid training to parents, community members, and in many cases, students. And again, so with the collaborative work in the community, this stuff is just going deeper and going farther. Just yesterday, we had 7 trainers out at Harford Technical High School. They were training our 490 bus drivers who serve our special needs population. All 490 bus drivers were getting training on brain development and the impact of trauma using the interactive brain architect game. So We're at a place now where we're even training our bus drivers because they're the first point of contact for our students. So they were in for that training yesterday. We earlier in the summer we have contract bus drivers also. We met with the contractors. And so we've been doing this, mental health support, with our frontline people, most notably, again, that first contact to bus drivers. Prior to the blueprint, we provided training to SAD and STARS groups on the dangers of opioids. I mean, where we were 4 years ago, we were still trying to figure out, and that was the big thing we were confronting. But now, because of the blueprint with our Director of Health and Wellness, arranging more comprehensive days of wellness awareness, it's going much deeper, our middle schools and high schools, and we're doing all mental health and wellness, and building on the work from the partnerships through the opioid work. Prior to Blueprint, we had a program called Handle with Care. We began this. Handle with Care is something where law enforcement, at first it was just one entity in law enforcement, when they encountered a student in a home who might have been a witness to trauma or a witness to a crime or something bad happened, law enforcement would inform the school that, the next day we can't tell you, there's privacy, we can tell you exactly what happened, but here's a student who needs to be handled with care today. And we started that initiative pre-Blueprint, pre-COVID. But again, because of our partnership with the Department of Social Services and our committee, our Handle with Care now covers our entire district. We have multiple law enforcement entities who do it, but also we're including referrals from the Department of Social Services. So again, if a student's experiencing acute trauma in one evening, the next day the school knows that they need to treat that student a little differently. We're a district that created a mental health assessment, and we gave the first draft of that to every student. I know there's something coming up about that in the timeline for school systems. Because of Blueprint, we're doing both a physical health and a mental health needs assessment for our students. And again, looking at the overall health of our students is some of the work we're doing here. Here is another one that's kind of fun. And if I can share a screen, I'll show you. If not, I'll just tell you how to get there. Currently, when our students log on to their devices, they see a message that reads, so everyone knows this. You'll log on to your devices. There's some warning about privacy and not sharing your stuff. Everyone has that. Ours says, your mental and physical wellness are important to us. Please click on the link below for resources and contact information if in need of support. So here, when you click on that link, it takes you to basically just a page. It's our intro page for mental health supports called the Mental Health Zone. And
Dr. Bolson, you can
Yes.
share your screen if you'd like to.
Sure, let me see if I can get this one up. I'll do it real quick. Hang on, share screen. Here's the page it takes you to. So some of it might be obscured by however your screen looks, but if you click on that link, and again, every student sees this when they log in, it just gives you the numbers. And so physical, sexual, emotional abuse or neglect, there's a number there for who to call for Child Protective Services. Anxious, depressed, stressed, we have our Hartford Crisis Center. We have numbers to that. Report threats or situations. Again, we can get to the police, but there's an anonymous tip line for Maryland. And then the one on the left, which is obscured on my screen, but that is the, thinking of suicide number that a student can access. So we put it right there in front of students so they can find those numbers easily. And again, they, like all of us, when we log in, sometimes we don't pay much attention to that screen because we've seen it every day. But it's there. So we're trying to think of how to put something so important in front of them. So that's something we did. And then there's one other thing. Is there now a PDF showing this as mental health supports at the top? Is that what you're seeing on my screen? Maybe not.
Yes, it says mental
Oh,
health
it is what you
supports.
see.
Yes.
Again, this is our website. If you go in under students, if you click on students from the main page, you come to student supports, and then you'll find something for mental health supports. This is just a list. We took, and so not going to be able to read it. It's going to be too small, but what you're going to see is this is a very comprehensive list of things that are going around the topic of mental health and student supports in our district. And I would argue that most of my colleagues are doing very similar things. And so it's a lot to track. And the work through this pillar of the blueprint has just been essential, particularly at the time we're dealing with, where we're seeing an increased crisis in mental health. So to have those resources has just been, tremendously beneficial. feel like I've hit most of the key elements. So I wanted to touch on just 2 requests to the board. These were sort of gentle asks. I shared the one thing about the special ed, and if we could look at some sort of incentive to keep special educators in special ed classrooms. Another is the community schools issue. Currently in the blueprint, with the funding we get, you're required to have 40 community schools to be able to hire a community schools coordinator. And one thing in the blueprint, I think we all feel is a little weak on, particularly now as we're trying to implement, is the blueprint does a lot to put people in front of kids and in the classrooms and in the field, but we struggle at the leadership level to support what we need to coordinate all this and get it going. And so any help, because we're finding that the work with these community schools is fantastic work, but they're coordinating so many resources from so many places that to do that well, they really need more leadership. And, if you compare it to Title I, because right now our Title I budget's a little bigger than our community schools budget, but at the rate community schools is growing, it's likely to be actually a bigger chunk of our budget in community schools. I have a small but effective Title I team, but I really have no one I could dedicate to right now to coordinate the community schools work. So that is, that's another area. Another ask is, as I indicated, we have a mental health screener that we have implemented in the district. We've refined it, and I think it's going to be a little stronger going into this next year. And I know that we'll be looking at doing something like that statewide. And my hope is that before a product comes out, that we'll have a chance to, so there may be 2 options. One, you're looking at incorporating what we're doing, maybe what other districts are doing, but the other might be and something like this rolled out with MSTE with the learning management system. There is a system the state will provide you if you don't have one, but if you have one and it meets a standard, you can use that one. So we'd like to have some flexibility in doing, gathering our own data for the mental health supports. So I just asked for, to kind of think about how we can manage the local control for this type of thing. And that there's probably other examples throughout the blueprint where we're going to have conversations like that. But with the mental health screener, again, that one we know is coming down the pike, and we're pretty proud of what we have and pleased with what it's giving us. And so we'd hate to get that started for a few years and then lose it. And so I will close with some of the work that was going on in the district is, we're finding that really closing the achievement gaps with the students in poverty takes so much more than we've traditionally. We know we've always had to differentiate, but we haven't differentiated quite aggressively enough. And so we're seeing layers of supports in our schools, and our community schools are a place where they have funding coming in from a lot of different places. And in Harford County, we did something like that as well. Connected to what was here, we identified priority schools, not community schools. We've actually put something out with the definitions of all these type of schools we have. But our priority schools are like our Title I adjacent. They're our next tier of like the next poorest schools. But the pattern we found in every one of them, and I thought this was interesting listening to Mr. Chaudhary today, every one of those schools but one was also our school. They were also our schools that had the highest number of staff turnover. So just back to that question, I know this was discussed earlier. Title I, we have the turnover. So we identified our priority schools based on which schools were experiencing the most turnover. And in fact, the only school that was a high poverty school that didn't have it is the high school I'm sitting in now. We made them a priority school anyway because they have such needs. But this is just one of those places that has a great culture that's hung on to their people. And all of our districts have those schools as well, but it's a little bit of a trend bender school. So I give them credit for that, but I think they deserve those supports. So again, I just want to take a moment to share some of the great things going on here. I didn't do a survey of what's happening in every district, but I think you could find 23 other superintendents who would tell some very similar stories about what they're doing for students right now. There's no shortage of examples. Anything you can do to reach out and tap us for those, we're excited to talk about it. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Williams. Or should I ask if there's any questions first? I know we're running a little late, but happy to answer questions, but maybe we can let Dr. Williams go and the others and come back and we can all answer questions at once.
Questions.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for all that you do in your leadership. I'm Darrell Williams, the superintendent of Baltimore County Public Schools. I have been asked to talk briefly about the local impact of teacher shortage. And I too want to thank Mr. Chaudhary for his presentation this afternoon. And I'm gonna ask Mary Pat if she can share. Thank you. Great, thank you, Mary Pat. Go to the next slide. So the teacher shortage crisis has had both long and short-term impacts on school systems. In the long term, we heard it today, we must address compensation, fair compensation for important work, utilizing ESSER and Blueprint funding to elevate the profession, workload and the demands. We are being reasonable on requests of our classroom teachers and how we have prioritized what is important and respect. Do educators feel valued, heard, and part of this work? The short term requires us to be innovative, creative, and resourceful to bridge the gap. So this slide depicts some of the ways we have responded to the shortage in Baltimore County Public Schools. Just to highlight a few: aggressive recruitment, master schedule support, teacher incentives in elementary, abbreviated schedule options, and a robust plan for new teacher support. Next slide, please. Our short-term solutions have focused on strategic and innovative recruitment efforts. Mary Pat, can you do advance, please? Thank you. Recruitment efforts, resource reallocation, and reimagine school structures. As a result, Baltimore County Public Schools has addressed 98% of our teacher staffing needs, and we are now have fewer than 200 remaining classroom vacancies. Specifically, we have recruitment season, which is year-round. Internal resources must be examined and reallocated for direct impacts on students. Student relationships and access to consistent, high-quality instruction must be the priority. Collaboration across divisions with unions and principals is a must. External partnerships with retirees, universities, substitutes, and businesses are critical. Leveraging e-learning resources for specialized courses, identifying tasks that are mission critical and remove other tasks from the plates of teachers and leaders. Continue to work with our higher ed partners, including our HBCUs, and increase participation in the Teacher Academy of Maryland, and grow your own programs, where we look at our paraeducators with a 4-year degree, and we offer workshops to prepare our staff to receive their certification. Next slide, please. We have used ESSER funds to temporarily provide short-term solutions to address compensation. In the long term, we need to incorporate additional fundings, as you heard today, about Blueprint and operating budget as a funding source. Next slide. I'd like to share this. We are still hiring. As you can see, we had a banner over in Ocean City. Department of Human Resources staff are engaged in intensive recruitment and hiring efforts, and central office teams are working with schools and partnering organizations to maximize efficiency and reduce hiring needs. So I want to thank you again for this opportunity to provide a brief overview. And if there are questions, I will pause or I will pass it on to the next presenter. Thank you.
Next presenter, please come forward. Thank you, Ms. Action.
Yep, I'm Karen Acton, the Chief Financial Officer for Charles County Public Schools. My presentation is pretty easy and quick. I'm going to be talking about how Charles County is planning to meet the $60,000 starting salary that we need to have by July 1, 2026. So this year, in the current fiscal year, we were able to raise the starting salary to $54,508. We compressed the first 3 levels of the scale, and we gave a 2.75% COLA to all teachers. In order to reach the 60,000, we are planning a minimum 2.5% COLA each year for the next fiscal years to reach it. Our county government asked that we try to have consistent increases and not have a large increase at the end. So that's why our plan is to have the 2.5%. And you can see in the chart below that would bring us, if that's what we end up doing, to 60,168 for fiscal year 2027. Next slide, please. So in order to meet the 10% increase for teachers that we need to have by July 1, 2024, we've looked at it in two different ways. One is that we took the current value of our teacher scale, which is 12 million, current value is 13,120,464. And then we also compared that to the value as of 6/30/2019, which was 12,054,982. So that increase is 8.8%, which would leave us 1.2% that we would need to have by fiscal year 2025. If we just look at the COLAs that we've given, if that's the measure that we use, we've given 7.37% in COLAs through fiscal year 2023, and we would need to give a 2.63% increase by fiscal year 2025. Since we have said on the previous slide that we need to give at least a 2.5% increase in the next fiscal years to reach the $60,000, we're not anticipating having an issue meeting the 10% requirement in Charles County. And that's all I have.
Good afternoon. My name is Leslie Pellegrino. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for Frederick County Public Schools. And I'm talking on a similar topic that Karen just covered, which is how we're approaching the 10% requirement and the beginning salary $60,000 requirement of the blueprint legislation. Just like Charles County, we're looking at the 10%. We do not anticipate this is going to be too difficult of a goal to reach. Please realize Frederick County Public Schools, unfortunately, has the situation where we're one of the lowest beginning salaries in the state. We're either the bottom or the next to the bottom over the last 5 years. So there was an aggressive approach to try to negotiate higher salaries before even the blueprint to get us up to be a more competitive beginning salary within our system. So if you look, we've almost reached our 10% requirement already through FY23, and we only have a small amount to go in FY24. So we do anticipate this will be fairly easy to achieve. What's really going to be the challenge for us here in Frederick County is the beginning salary of $60,000. Mary Pat, if you can go to the next slide. Thank you. Our current starting salary for a bachelor's degree is just under $52,000 a year. So we've got a good 16% to go to get to that $60,000 mark as a beginning salary. If you average that over the next 4 years, that's of course a 4% increase if we're just looking at COLAs. And of course, all of that is subject to negotiations. But as Mr. Chaudhry mentioned during his presentation, of course, we would like to get there much faster than 4 years. And all of that's going to be dependent on many factors. One of the things that we've done in the past is what we call lopped off or eliminated beginning steps to hopefully raise that beginning salary. But what that does is compress your steps. So you end up with teachers that may have multiple years of experience, 2, 3, 4 years of experience setting on the same step. And again, as presentation earlier today, when they talked about who we're losing, when we're losing those teachers in those first 3 and 4 years that are leaving us, it doesn't help when you compress those scales because that only exacerbates that compression problem, and it also leads to potential turnover. So we've got to be very careful as we're looking at this and negotiating this over the next couple of years. Some big concerns we have when it comes to reaching this $60,000 beginning salary is we have what is called Me Too language here in our county, which I believe about half the counties in the state have. And what that means is we have language in our other associations, our support associations contract and our administrative unit contracts that basically says what we negotiate for our teachers, they get also. That can add up quickly. And that doesn't give us a lot of latitude when it comes to the price tag that goes with any of these increases. Another concern we have in Frederick County, which is a double-edged sword, is our growth. Frederick County is fortunately one of the fastest growing counties in the state. Last year, I believe we were the only county that grew in total enrollment. This means that as we're projecting, and we're continuing to project that we're going to grow at these rates, as we continue to project that growth in student enrollment, that means as we plan our budget for the upcoming year, we need to have more teachers, more administrators, more support within our schools. And also on the capital side, of course, is more schools, because we're growing about a school a year here in Frederick County. So those things affect us because you have to plan for that and budget for that. And unfortunately, revenues are always a year behind when it comes to your enrollment. So the enrollment we have last year is what we're going to base the state aid on for the upcoming year. Some other factors that are also affecting our budget, and Dr. Bolson mentioned those earlier, is our social emotional supports that are needed within our school system. We also have continuing needs when it comes to supports in our special education area. That is, I'm sure each and every one of us in the LEAs know how much that is continuing to cost us each year. And unfortunately, we had the thing that none of us wanted in the middle of this implementation of Blueprint, but we have the inflationary costs that are increasing. And so that's affecting us greatly. As you look at your non-salary type of items in your budget, your materials of instruction, your utilities, your gas and fuel, those are all going up significantly this past year and into this year. So those are affecting us. And last but not least, one of our concerns here in Frederick County is we have our county executive who's been with us for 8 years. We switched to a charter government 8 years ago, and we've had the same county executive for 2 terms. She is terming out, and so we have uncertainty as we get a new county executive going into the next year. And so local funding is going to be critical for us because we not only need the Blueprint funding from the state, but we also need the funding from our local government to help us meet these requirements. I will then pause and we can take any questions from the 4 presenters.
All right. Thank you so very much, and thanks to all of the presenters. We have a few questions. I have one for the last 2 presenters on the question of the increases that are anticipated or necessary in order to get you to the 60% level. I wasn't quite sure whether the amounts that you indicated would be add-ons to what your regular negotiation would possibly include, or were you thinking amounts beyond that? I wasn't quite sure how you were expressing that. Could you clarify that a little bit for me? Either one of the last 2.
Sure, I'll start first. So these amounts are minimums that we need to be able to give. Our unions are almost always negotiating for a step or a level increase, but the COLAs are what are going to get us to the 60,000. So this is on top of what else we would negotiate for. That's, at least in Charles, that's what the situation is. Leslie?
Yes, exactly. And the Blueprint legislation states that when we're looking at that 10% requirement, that these have to be salary increases above your negotiated schedules. So your step increases in the majority of your contracts are already as part of there. They're based on funding, but they're already in your contract. So most of these you're going to see are additionals and above and beyond your step increases that we see normally see in an annual basis.
Yeah, I was aware of that. I just want to make sure that in explanation, there was no inconsistency between what the Blueprint has expressed and how you interpret what it is that you need to do in order to get to that number and so forth. You indicated that there are other concerns as well that will make it difficult, and the compression problem as well, which I think is a very strong and legitimate one. And the Me Too challenges associated with administrative support staff and others, what is the level or the sort of gross number that you look at in terms of what that would mean? Do you have any round figures about once you move to that? Because I didn't see that in the presentation, other than saying that you'd have to address that.
For example, in Frederick County, and I'll give you some round numbers. And remember, Frederick County, I consider us kind of in the middle of the pack when it comes to size and wealth. A 1% increase to our salaries, and that's for all of our employees, you know, our support employees, administrative, and our teachers, is about $4.5 million, and that includes our fringes. So that can add up significantly as you see these increases. If you're talking about a 4% increase, you're talking 18 million on top of your step. And so that's very costly, and that's why it's imperative that we not only see increases from our state aid, but also increases from our local governments.
No, but I was asking, what would the number be for your administrative and support staff as well in terms of the Me Too clauses that you generally have in your negotiated agreements?
The percentage amount's the same because they get equivalent percentage.
I know, but I'm trying to, you obviously have more teachers than you have support staff. So
exactly. So the
is
teachers is about 3 million of that 4.5. So it's about another 1.5 million.
Okay, thank you.
And in Charles County, we don't have Me Too language in our other union contracts, but we as a practice have always given the same. So, you know, we're in the same situation. And what I have done is I've tried to stay close with my counterparts in the county government and given them estimates on what I believe our labor costs at a minimum are going to be to get us to the 60,000. And so in our situation here, you know, I've given them a figure that is like $26 million that they don't like too much, but I try to be as transparent as I can be and keep them updated on what's happening.
There was a mention earlier about the growth in the county. Would that have impacted or in a positive way impacted the revenue for the county as well, that offsets some of that?
Oh, certainly. Your growth definitely increases your state aid because of enrollment's a big factor of the state aid calculations. But again, it's offset by the need for more teachers, more administrators, and more supports within our schools. And so that does help, but again, it's lagging a year till we get those revenues. So eventually when we level back off, that will help us.
Right, I got you, okay. Additional questions, Rachel?
Dr. Doss?
Thank you, Rachel. And thank you all for coming and sharing this information with us directly. It's very much appreciated. I have a question for Dr. Pellegrino, and I think I heard you correctly when you said that Frederick County is at the bottom, so to speak, with teacher salaries. And just to give it just a brief context to that, could you just explain like why you think that is?
Oh, that's an excellent question. We went through a period of time during the recession in 09, 10, 11, where we had no salary increases. Our funding was limited from our local government, and we had no maintenance of, we were funded only at maintenance of effort levels. And that affected us greatly with the ability to give increases to our teachers and to all of our staff. And so that kind of put us behind many years, and that got us down to the bottom. And so we've tried to build our way out of that, and it's been a challenge, and it continues to be a challenge because of, like I said, all the other competing things that we have in our budget.
Thank you. Thank you.
I've also done some research. When you look at Frederick County, we have poverty, but we don't have great poverty. We have EL students, but we don't have proportionally high EL students. So when you look at that, we kind of fall in the middle of the formulas. We do not get a lot of funding in those regards. And so I always say we kind of, the Goldilocks syndrome, we're in the middle. and that's affected us also.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mhm.
And one question for Dr. Bolson. In your presentation, you said that you had 2 asks for the board. And I heard one clearly. It says coordinating, helping with, or support for coordinating community schools. And then the other ask was?
The other was to keep us in the game when we're talking about the mental health survey. That one doesn't get published without us having some option either to use ours or incorporate. So just when you're looking at things, think of the resources sitting with the locals.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Who's next?
I do not see
I have-
any other hands.
Yeah, I had a question to Dr. Boston. Thank you for your presentation and all the things that you are doing now, either in anticipation or in some form of fashion. You've done things in the past that will get you somewhat ahead of the anticipated changes required from the AIB. As chair of your group, what is the reaction across the system in terms of people taking proactive measures to sort of get ahead? Do you have a feel for that, and as opposed to simply waiting until we're at a time that it's very difficult to get them done, or your colleagues taking proactive measures already? What's the sense of that, if you can?
It's definitely different by pillar, right? So, I mean, the reason I wanted to speak about this one today is this is a place where some of the money came earlier, but also the urgency of the pandemic really drove it as an absolute need for us to focus on mental health and those student support services, and to have the funding come in when it did to be allowed to focus on that was absolutely essential. So I felt like, at least generally among the superintendents, that in this student supports area, that's where they feel like they're farthest ahead on the blueprint. The other areas, there's a little trickier. The career ladder, we're really concerned about the ability to negotiate. Now the career ladder is pretty well scripted out what needs to be done. So it's not the designing the what, it's figuring out how we're going to navigate those. So I would argue districts are probably farther behind in that. Career and college readiness, there's a lot of great work that's been done in it, but there's some things that are going to slow us down and make it hard. One of them being that, MSTE is still doing the thing to define that CCR cutoff and how best to look at that. And so building a plan prior to that coming out will just lead to a lot of adjusting of the plan afterwards. But again, districts, I think you could probably ask around, there's a lot being done in CCR because we've been focusing on this for years. So really it's more aligning with the blueprint expectations there. And then the early childhood one, which is particularly the issue related to the universal or expansion of pre-K. It's the one sort of unfixable for us is the lack of private providers, and the fact that at least the current structure as it looks isn't appealing to those private providers. And, so, that's a huge concern for us, because there's the timeline to increase the cutoffs or the eligibility, which will increase the demand for pre-K. But without the private providers stepping up, our ability to change the capacity in our buildings from a capital perspective, that's a very slow ask. Even if we were to really aggressively jump on getting more pre-K capacity in our buildings, that's a many-year task. And so we need a lot of help figuring out how we're going to increase the capacity for the private providers. So again, we're doing some things. We've had some interesting conversations around that, but we're having difficulty getting ahead of that one because we almost have no one to talk to in terms of those private providers. And so we need some more innovation there. I would lean a little bit on MSDE. I know Mr. Chaudhary has some experience with that type of work as well. And so each pillar is very different, and each of my committees are very different. So I think, looking at them a little separately, we know they're all intertwined, but
if
Daryl,
if I might add to that, with the third largest system in the state, I would have to say the pre-K is a challenge The beauty that we have is working with our county officials and looking at not only our capital improvement plan, but also talking with our county executive and his team about how we can expand that pre-K. But as Dr. Bolson saying, the private providers, that's something that we are still looking and will be searching for. And then as I presented today, just that high quality and diverse staff population. We can be very creative about getting folks certified conditionally, looking at grow your own programs. But the goal, one of my goals within our strategic plan is our diverse teaching and leaders positions. And so looking at who's out there in that pipeline, a lot of it's building the pipeline internally, but we still have to rely on our higher eds. And so we work collaboratively with our local universities and colleges, but we still have to go outside of the state to try to find our staff. And that has been an ongoing challenge for years, trying to fill the number of vacancies in our systems, in our schools. I would just want to add that.
We're putting things in place to start turning our elementary students into teachers, to plant those seeds for them. It's a strategic approach and we'll have a good, but there's a long return on investment there. I mean, we have some other sort of quicker turnaround things going, but I think we're all looking at how to create a different culture to really inspire more people to get into teaching, because money's not going to be the only answer.
Okay. Is there any additional questions, Rachel?
I do not see any.
If not, thank you for all of your participation today. I know that we're going to continue to be engaged in further discussion to make sure that we can be as supportive as possible to ensure that we get to the point that we can achieve the objectives that are outlined in the blueprint. Thank you all so very much.
Thank you all.
Okay. Rachel, why don't we take a 5-minute break and then we'll come back and cover some of the matters that you have, and then we'll go directly to executive session if you don't mind.
Sure.
Okay.
So 5-minute break.
Let me know when everybody's back.
We are still missing
Okay.
Jennifer Lynch, who I think is not even, I think she might have accidentally left the Zoom. We can just give her a minute.
Okay, we're about ready to start.
Yeah, why don't we go ahead and start, and Dr. Lynch will join us if she can.
Yeah. I think we're supposed to turn it over to you at this point in time to.
Yeah, very brief update I wanted to provide on a couple of items. The first is the website. So we launched the AIB's website earlier this month, and we've gotten really positive feedback. So that's been nice. And we've also received some helpful suggestions. So we're working to, we're going to sort of be in a continuous improvement model here with the website, and just make changes as it makes sense. We're also working on enhancements to the website that we're going to be rolling out in the next month or two. And then we're planning for some really significant expansions of the website, particularly around the comprehensive plan and monitoring blueprint progress. But that will be a little further off. But just encourage everyone watching to keep coming back to the AIB website. That's going to be the best place to get information on what the AIB is doing and when meetings are being held, including advisory committee meetings and other things like that. We will continue to post full AIB meetings in the public hearing schedule, the General Assembly's public hearing schedule. But other meetings will just be posted on the AIB's website, as well, along with videos, archive videos of meetings. And then just a recruitment update. The job positions for the finance director of AIB and an assistant attorney general have closed. So we are in the process of reviewing applicants and making selections, and hopefully we will have both of those positions filled very soon. And we are going to be recruiting for additional positions after Labor Day. And that is going to include a research and accountability director, an outreach and communications director, and several, what I'm referring to as education analysts, who have education experience in different areas of the blueprint, as well as in research and data. And so we'll be posting all of those sometime after Labor Day, hopefully shortly after Labor Day, and we will provide links on the AIB website. There is a About AIB tab, and then we have a menu on the left-hand side that has AIB staff, and that is where we will post links to all of the recruitment notices, and they'll also be posted on the state's jobs website, and we will also share them out as much as broadly as we can to as many different outlets as we can to try to get as much interest in our positions as possible. And then the last item is just on the budget. We are in the process of building the budget for next fiscal year 2024. We are now right in the beginning of fiscal year 23. And so our budget request is due to the Department of Budget and Management soon. And that is something that is confidential because it's an executive branch. So it's a privilege, so we can't talk about that publicly, which is one of the reasons why we are going to be going into closed session.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions? If not, is that everything we need to cover in terms of the public session?
Yes, I believe so.
Could you read our statement for us to go into executive statement?
Yes, I will. So motion would be to adjourn to executive session in accordance with the Open Meetings Act to discuss executive privilege budget information and for the administrative functions.
Okay. All right, I so move that we go into executive session. Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
It's been moved and second that we go into executive session. Any discussion on the motion? And we will also adjourn from the closed session as well.
Correct. The meeting
All-
will adjourn from the closed session.
Please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? No opposition. The ayes have it. We're going to meet into